Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Kudos to all of you for making it here on the fifth and final day of Ars Electronica Festival and the Ars Electronica Conference. Wow, good morning, kudos. My name is Vanessa Hannesschläger. I'm head of European collaboration here at Ars Electronica, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this final conference day, which we are hosting in the context of Studiotopia. Studiotopia is a European Union co-funded initiative in the context of the Creative Europe program, a pan-European collaboration project of cultural institutions who are invested in art-science collaborations. Together in Studiotopia, we investigate the Symbiocene, a vision in which we think about all agents on the planet living in collaboration together, agents such as living things, earth systems, but also machines. I would like to thank all of the partners that we are working together with in the context of Studiotopia. I'm not naming them all so as not to bore you. And I would also like to thank the 18 art-science collaborative duos that are currently in residency in the context of Studiotopia. Today's conference, Earth is a Sensorium, was developed together with the Ars Electronica residents in the Studiotopia project, a territorial agency, John and Anne-Sophie. You will hear from John in a minute, and Alex Damianos. Very warm welcome and thanks for joining us. They are collaborating in their Studiotopia project on an update on the Great Acceleration graphs, and you will of course also hear more about that in the course of this morning. So the next 2 hours are dedicated to an investigation of the Anthropocene, the human-shaped age that we live in, called also by some the Phallocene, such as the Austrian author Gertraud Klemm very recently, due to the vast disproportionate impact of penis-endowed creatures in the shaping of our planet. After that, you will have a chance to meet all of our Studiotopia residents in a World Cafe setting that we will be hosting over there. And you will have the possibility to learn also about all of their projects. Now, we're starting this morning with a first input from John Palmesino, very warm welcome, who will be giving us a lecture entitled Anthropocene Anthropocene Territory Shield. This is a lecture that John, in collaboration with Anne-Sophie as territorial agency, developed in the context of the Starts for Water 2 project, some of which outcomes you can also see around the exhibition this year. So we also thank Gluon a lot for the collaboration in exhibiting some of the works. And I'm now handing over to John. Just saying one more thing. John is, together with Anne-Sophie Rönskog, territorial agency, a duo who are not only members of the Anthropocene working group, but have also been awarded with the START Prize a few years back, and we are very much looking forward for your input.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Can we maybe start the video? Thank you. I'm going to use 10 minutes of your time this morning to introduce you to a few elements of practice and thinking about the Anthropocene. And I'm going to focus in particular on the notion of what is an Anthropocene territory. I'm not going to pay so much attention to the entire debate on the Anthropocene, but I want to focus on the territorial dimension. And this is the work that I'm going to present, develop in the ambit of a collaboration with Gluon, the fantastic Center for Science and Art from Brussels, and Vito, which is the Innovation Center of the Flanders. And we have been investigating how the estuary of the Scheldt River, which is part of the larger Rhine-Maas Delta, where the second largest harbor in Europe is located, is now in the very early phases of a new inundation. Over the last 3 millennia, sea level has varied little more than 10 centimeters, the size of your palm. And we are now entering a very rapid rise of the sea. And the Paris Agreement, that we all cheered, indicates at 2 degrees, the minimum goals of our collaboration, that enough energy will be locked in to raise the seas up to 3.5 meters, 6 meters in the coming 100 years. Within the first 30 years from now, the sea will rise between 50 centimeters and 70 centimeters. Within this century, 1.5 meters to be conservative, covering areas that are completely urbanized around the world and currently inhabited by more than 1 billion people. And of course, the horizon, the intersection of the sea and the sky is changing. And we always think of the horizon as something beautiful to look at when you go to the beach in the summer. But today the horizon is, of course, also this chart, the CO2 chart that looks at the variation of the respiration of the biosphere in the planet, and which is marked, for instance, in this beautiful graph in the killing curve, rapidly growing. And this is really also something that we will be discussing today, this rapid growth of CO2. And here you see 10,000 years ago, the Holocene, and this is 800,000 years of CO2 in the atmosphere. And that ultra-rapid rise is nothing else than the marker of the construction of a new planetary system, which is, according to Peter Haff, called the technosphere, the sum of all structures that keep humans alive have now been networked and connected, and they are consuming so much energy and propelled largely by fossil fuels and moving so much materials, energy, and information that is now a component of the Earth, similar in magnitude to the biosphere in its mass and also energy and information consumption. The difficulty of thinking a space that has always been stable for thousands of years, like the Scheldt, where land has grown up into the sea during the Holocene and built up slowly spaces that we could occupy, and civilizations have grown in that area, is really a complex one. It's a shift in the horizons. And today, to get hold of that space that is no longer simply growing out, but is starting to sink because of the rapid urbanization processes and the simultaneous rise of the sea, is a condition that demands a reorientation of a sensorium. And the project has been really how to connect different modes of sensing this location, which is one of the key centers of European culture. Think of the role of Mercator in Antwerp, or of course the entire Flemish paintings of landscape. So the project is nothing else than a prototype to connect the data of Earth observation that allows us and allows the technosphere to enter the first understanding of how the Earth is being changed and moved by technology, and trying to understand how those data can be connected to normal life data. And we did this through a very complex set of technologies that are quite easy to use, like large language models, that are enormous amount of information, but they intercept largely the part of the data that is human-based. There's an entire part of data which is information of the technosphere that is equivalent in size to everything that we know about human activity, archives, libraries, the entire internet, that is almost untouched, which is Earth observation data. And you can only take out Earth observation data, satellite imagery, LiDAR scans, submarine bathymetric data if you know exactly what you're looking for. And so this is limiting the capacity of understanding the technosphere. And the project is really to use these large language models to connect papers and normal language to processes that are shaping the Earth and the planet. And in the meantime, of course, what we discover is that territoriality stops being the conditions through which you are simply holding on to something, that you own part of land, you own property, you structure systems that are stable, as if we are still imagining a pastoral landscape. On the contrary, the ultra-rapid rise of the technosphere indicates that it's Gaia that is snatching back all our human structures and revealing somehow the etym of territory as terror. The Earth is fighting back somehow and terrorizing us through the megastorms, the erosion, the sea level, and territory is a condition related to deter, to keep out. And the markers, the semantic markers that we are starting to understand in the large language model connect exactly these territorial structures, how to enable different groups, different polities of this technosphere to start thinking planetary territorialities and how they weigh in on each other. And the difficulties in thinking this is, of course, that you can never see a territory from the outside. You always can only describe a territory from within. And it needs to be a multi-semantic exercise to mark the conditions and of warning off what keeps other entities from impinging on what keeps your entity alive. And the dimensions are multiple. Of course, they can be, you depend maybe on very complex legislation of the European Union, or you depend directly on supply chain of your food. And all of these structures are being left usually outside our remit of sensing. And the project and the discussion that will follow today is really about trying to think of sensing these structures that help us maintaining us alive at the moment when the very structures that we are building are inhibiting us from understanding what we depend on. So this paradox that the technosphere is a self-organizing, autonomous structures that spins off from the biosphere in which we are a component of, but we are not the main drivers. What does it entail for politics, for citizenship? And the larger question I think that we will address in the coming hour is what does it mean to think of being alive at the time of the transformation of the biosphere with the spin of the technosphere. And the question for us at Territorial Agency is how to think of multiple agencies, capacity to connect entities, and multiple ways of safeguarding from the intrusion of the very structures that we rely upon on our life. It's a sort of autoimmune disease that we are facing in the Anthropocene. And with this, I would like to thank again the fantastic support that was given to Territorial Agency for this project by Gluon. I see Christoph in the audience and Vito, and I look forward to a very nice discussion comes now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for opening up the day and also opening up our thinking a little bit. Now that we have heard a little bit of reflection on the territory that is terrorizing us, we will go a little bit back to the start, so to say, and get a little bit of a introductory perspective given to us by John's current collaborator, Alexander Damianos. He's a lecturer and a researcher at the University of Kent in environmental law. And before we dive into our panel discussion, Alex will give us a quick input to explain what actually is the Great Acceleration.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out so early on a Sunday morning. Yeah, as was explained, this project, this panel today is really kind of anticipating an exhibition that will happen next year here at Ars Electronica as part of this collaborative, the Studiotopia program that brings me as a kind of scholar or scientist into collaboration with territorial agency as an artist. Of course, the irony there is that territorial agency are not artists, they're architects, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer. But nevertheless, kind of in anticipation of this, our theme for next year's exhibition is updating the Great Acceleration charts. And to that extent, I wanted to provide an introduction. What is the Great Acceleration? In anticipation of the kind of interesting interventions that we'll have from the four speakers. So what do dams, shrimp, tourists, the ozone hole, GDP all have in common? Under conditions of climate crisis, we're witnessing that relations, connections, and associations, side effects, are perhaps more plentiful than we had been able to anticipate. And this was arguably the major insight of the Great Acceleration charts, which demonstrate a remarkable consistency across a range of very diverse signals. What they demonstrate as well is that the world is changing. Of course, the world has always been changing, but the way in which those changes are happening is changing. The way in which the world is changing itself. As a result of the Great Acceleration charts, we know when this unique pace and degree of change begins, and that is in the mid-20th century. So around about 1950, we see a near exponential increase that cuts across what the authors identify or kind of distinguish as socioeconomic trends on the one hand and Earth system trends on the other. But kind of the interesting paradox with these charts is that precisely in drawing our attention to this distinction, they actually demonstrate that that distinction itself has collapsed, that actually the difference between nature and human culture or technology is perhaps not really tenable anymore. And that what unites these two, kind of what cuts across that distinction, is precisely this exponential increase. Now, these charts emerge from a particularly distinct way of understanding the planet, and that is Earth system science. So the term Great Acceleration was first used in 2005 during a workshop that took place on the outskirts of Berlin called the Dahlem Workshop on Integrated History and Future of People on Earth, the acronym of which is I Hope. If you think about it, it's quite interesting that the way that the scientists framed the significance of this project was as a kind of narrative of hope. So this conference brought together a lot of the scientists who had been working in this field of Earth system science. And the authors of the Great Acceleration charts note that in bringing these charts together, their intention was to explore the significance of complex interlinked drivers of change upon the Earth system that had arisen with the expansion of human activities, and to assess the structure and functioning of the Earth system using these key indicators. So relationships, in other words, is really at the heart of this work, of this new emergent field of Earth system science, in a way that might resonate with a lot of the language that we've probably heard over the past few days here, things like nature cultures, more than human sensing. These kinds of idioms of thought are very much present and precipitate from Earth system science. So the idea of Earth system itself emerges at around the same time that we begin to see this exponential increase, around the middle of the 20th century. Specifically, it's first used in 1988, or one of its first reported uses is in 1988, as part of a NASA report called Earth System Science, a Program for Global Change. And the report comes out of this Cold War context, much like the Anthropocene that it would anticipate. And it has three main points that it's trying to make. The first is the need for an integrated approach that sets out to understand the Earth not simply as a single entity, but as a multiplicity of interactions and components that require us to shift from individual expertise to an interdisciplinary or global perspective. The second is that the Earth could be modeled as a system. And this is important because what we see in this idea is already that the computational, or the idea of the computer, begins to emerge as a conceptual analogy and a model for thinking the planetary. So we can chart graphs retrospectively, as they've done in the Great Acceleration charts, but you can also begin to anticipate if you begin to think of the planet as a computational strategy. By making estimates or predictions in the form of statistical analyses that draw on this vast machine of sensors, weather stations, and observatories that had been set up around the planet as a result of the military efforts of the 20th century. And thirdly, the report states that there's a need to conduct such observations, that the reason why we need to do this kind of research, to sense and program and model the Earth continuously, is because we're starting to become aware of the remarkable and truly dramatic changes that is resulting as a result, that's coming about as a result of human activity, okay? So the report is clear that the growing awareness of anthropogenic influence is the primary objective of Earth system science. And it's also interesting to note, Will Steffen, who's one of the authors of the original Great Acceleration charts, stresses that systems are plural. It's not Earth system science, it's Earth system science. You have a multiplicity of different factors that relate to each other in a way that reveals something greater than the sum of its parts. We understand the Earth as something different precisely by understanding the relationships between these different components. In other words, if we know what's going to happen, or if we can agree a common way to imagine or think about what will happen, then we can plan accordingly. So the capacity to act is not just about knowing something, but on agreeing what the meaning of that knowledge is. And this is arguably where the Anthropocene comes into the fold. So the Anthropocene is a term that was coined in the same circles that coined Earth system science and the Great Acceleration charts. And in fact, the first time it came up was at a meeting of Earth system scientists, where you had someone presenting on the Holocene. The Holocene is it's what the term that geologists use to describe the last 12,000 years. It's characterized by a period of remarkable climatic stability, unprecedented climatic stability. You had a scientist who was explaining that within the last 11,700 years, which are supposed to be characterized by stability, we've had a lot of aberrations from a stable baseline. And listening to this, Paul Crutzen, a Nobel laureate who had worked on sealing the ozone hole, gets up, as I invite any of you to do here now if you want, and says, we're not in the Holocene, we're in and allegedly on the spur of the moment, coins this term Anthropocene. Anthropocene comes from the Greek word anthropos, which is human, and scene, which is a suffix common to geological classifications of the Earth. And so the task that Crutzen kind of gave rise to as a result of this provocation, this interruption, was to define, is there a material reality to the idea of the Anthropocene? Or is it just a term that we can use to talk about, kind of a synonym for climate change? And the Great Acceleration played a remarkable role in that, because what the scientists, the geologists who worked on this definition, of course they weren't only geologists, they were architects such as John and Anne-Sophie, they were historians such as John McNeill, they were lawyers. What they all came to the conclusion is that the clearest, the sharpest indication that's actually truly global, that's actually truly a material change that can be witnessed everywhere on Earth, is one of these mid-20th century spikes. And specifically, it's the detonation of nuclear bombs. So this is the first nuclear bomb, which was detonated in 1945 on July the 16th at 11:29 a.m. and 21 seconds GMT. This is the first bomb. Now this bomb does not itself mark the base of the Anthropocene, but all of the subsequent bombs that were detonated between this moment and 1952 led to the entire planet being covered in a blanket of plutonium, specifically plutonium-239-240, which is a type of plutonium that was otherwise almost entirely absent from the rock record. It had never really appeared before on Earth. It's so global, the extent of this blanket of nuclear fallout, that even on the most remote island in the world, which is somewhere halfway between, or one of the most remote islands, somewhere halfway between Australia and the Antarctic, there's a single tree that was planted by a lost colonial wanderer. In this tree, if you extract a sample and look at the tree rings, there is the mid-20th century spike in plutonium. So the idea of the Great Acceleration gave rise to the premise that the Earth has changed in a completely unique way, beginning in the mid-20th century, and geologists were subsequently able to demonstrate that by reference to plutonium signals in rocks across the world that show evidence of this blanket of plutonium that coated the world between 1945 and truly in 1952 the world had been coated. Here, by the way, is the sample of rock that they used that shows that if you count each layer like a year, the sediment accumulates at a regular pace. You can actually demonstrate that at the level that is equivalent to the year 1952, you suddenly have this spike in plutonium. So what is updating? What does it mean to update the Great Acceleration charts? To ask this question is, in my understanding, to ask what stories the story of the Great Acceleration and Anthropocene tell. And what can we do with these stories? The Anthropocene was famously rejected, or perhaps not that famously, rejected by a group of geologists last year as an official geological term. But the fact that the term continues to be so viral, so useful to the way that we talk about our relationship to the planet, shows that it still has something to say. And in updating the charts, our interest is not just to extend the x-axis, which, as you can see, currently ends in 2015, in great part thanks to Owen, who will speak in a bit. So our interest is not, oh, here it's 2010. In a subsequent version, it goes up to 2015. Our interest is not just to extend the x-axis, but to ask, in what ways has the very idea of the Great Acceleration in the Anthropocene changed the way that not only scientists, but all of us think about our relationship to the planet? And more specifically, how has it changed the way that scientists think about their obligation as experts to somehow intervene in the unfolding climate crisis? With that, I will leave the space for the experts to now speak. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alex, for starting us off and getting us in a shared headspace. While the colleagues are doing the magic here behind me, I'm introducing you to what comes next. So we are now rejoined by John and Alex, as well as a fantastic panel that we also very much thank John and Alex for bringing to us here to Ars Electronica. Owen Gaffney, Armen Avanesian, Mark Williams, and Ulrike Feld will be discussing with us. And since we already have enough chairs, I would invite all of them to join me here on the stage, and John and Alex as well, of course. And so what the next 75-ish minutes are going to look like is the following. We will have our experts giving us each an input, a perspective on the topic of the Anthropocene, on the topic of the Great Acceleration, some perspectives that might be new to you also on the charts. So we will have from each of them an input first. And then we will have the other panelists react and discuss a bit, fighting is allowed as long as it's civilized. So we also want to have a little bit of tension here. And if there is not enough tension up here, I hope that you are going to be throwing it in, because after each of the inputs, there is of course also the possibility for you to ask questions, to participate, to maybe throw in an additional perspective that you would like to have discussed up here. All right, we're starting with a first input from Owen Gaffney, who is a global sustainability researcher and the Chief Impact Officer of the Nobel Prize. He founded 2 organizations, Earth for All, as well as the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And we're looking forward to having our first input from you.
Thanks very much, Vanessa. It's absolutely wonderful to be here, and it's great to be talking about the great acceleration charts. I can see them on the screen here, but is it possible that we could have the charts back on the screen, on the big screen? If that's,
there.
Great, thanks. Because I suppose, and I've been involved since 2009 with the International Geosphere Biosphere Program, the program that Alex has been talking about, that with Will Steffen and Paul Crutzen, the Nobel laureate, and others, working on systems change and this connection between humanity and the Earth system. And the first thing I would say, and maybe this is the first controversy, is and I want to say it because of the title of the talk here, Panic, Yes or No. You know, I'm actually very optimistic about, and I think we should be optimistic about our future. That we should, if we think about it, well, the Great Acceleration is one of the most profound changes in the history of the planet. Over this period, today, we can say with a reasonable amount of seriousness that we can solve many of the problems that have plagued humanity since the dawn of time. When it comes to poverty, when it comes to disease, when it comes to food security and feeding, growing populations, and when it comes to running a global energy system on clean energy, we know how to solve these now. So this should be, in fact, a very, very empowering time for us. And in fact, we've only been able to say this with a degree of confidence, I think, over the last decade, maybe. So that should be empowering, but it's not, because we should be doing much better than we are. And I think this gets back to this idea of the sensorium, this feedback system, the information system, the knowledge system is not working. And this is why we're in the situation we are here, which I should say, just to add to maybe conclude Alex's talk, that the humanity is now the prime driver of change of the biosphere, of the Earth system. And that is a huge, profound responsibility we have to deal with, and we have to take seriously, and we're clearly not, for a bunch of reasons. And one of those is, when we look at these curves, they're exponential curves, or quasi-exponential, or even super-exponential curves in some cases. And there's an old adage that humanity's greatest failing is that we don't understand the exponential function. And I think this was quite clear during the pandemic that when scientists and policymakers working together to figure out how to contain the pandemic, there was one of the clear mismatches in advice was this complete lack of understanding of how the exponential function would drive huge spread of infection very, very quickly. And just as a sort of a primer on that, the difference between linear thinking and exponential thinking would be if I was to take 30 linear steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, in this auditorium, I might get to somewhere towards the end of the window over there. But if I was to take exponential steps, as in doubling each time, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, after 30 steps, I would be 26 times around the planet, 26 orbits of Earth. So the scales are very, very difficult for our brains to comprehend. And the scale of this responsibility is very difficult for us to comprehend. The biologist E.O. Wilson famously said that we have the emotion, we have Stone Age emotions, we have medieval institutions, and we have godlike technologies and godlike powers today on that. So, if we go back to the exponential charts again, please, if we stick them up. So, just maybe to look at a little bit more detail at some of them. So, some of them are exponential trajectories. Some of them are like S-curves. They've gone up and then they've leveled off, like marine fish capture. And we might imply that, okay, maybe we're dealing with this in a sustainable way. But in reality, we're just running out of fish to capture. We're just at this peak that we can no longer. We're getting fish stock collapses. But in other areas, like with stratospheric ozone, there on the left, on the Earth system trends, we're seeing a stabilization there. And that is to do with the sensorium, our system of interacting, in some way functioning, I'm going to say, the reasonably well is not quite the right word because we've taken huge risks. But slowly, the ozone hole, because of our scientific intervention, understanding, knowledge, and then political intervention, we've been able to stabilize the ozone hole, and it should fully recover by the end of this century. So there's going to be, so this is a profound moment, but also it also shows some of the risks that we've taken, because the ozone hole is there because we're putting chemicals into the atmosphere that have eating away ozone. One of the key chemicals, the CFC group of chemicals made from chlorine, among other elements. And the chlorine could have been replaced by bromine. Paul Crutzen, as Alex mentioned, the Nobel laureate who was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work on the ozone layer, he said, there was a choice, an industrial choice made early in the 20th century to create CFCs and use them in refrigerants and air conditioners. They're very, very effective. They didn't know they'd have an effect on the upper atmosphere at the time. But it could have used bromine instead of chlorine. It was 100 times more powerful at eating and destroying ozone as chlorine. And if we had used that, then there might be very little ozone left by the time we discovered. We made that discovery in the early 80s by the British Antarctic Survey. And so there would have been a much bigger disaster. And of course, we need the ozone layer for life on Earth. I mean, it protects us from harmful UV radiation. So we got extremely lucky in that instance. And throughout this period of the Great Acceleration, we've been lucky multiple times. We haven't had a nuclear war, for example, but we've come very, very close on multiple times. And this is partly to do, and this is down to the information system failing us. So we have to get better at this. We have to find more durable systems for that information exchange. We need to get that. There's missing feedback loops between our actions as our social system and the Earth system, essentially. So, and the reason, and I'll just finish by saying, while it is a great time to be alive for most people, and there is so much potential, the risks are now really stark. I mean, when the Great Acceleration graphs were first published, we could see that we're destabilizing the planet quite clearly. But what were the risks? How far could this go? And there was a lot of discussion and analysis of tipping points in the Earth system, the West Antarctic ice sheet, the Greenland ice sheet, the Amazon rainforest, the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, coral reefs, permafrost. But we had very little idea of how close we were to those tipping points. And the best science said it was maybe if we hit 3 degrees or so. And at that point, we were only at 1 degree temperature rise. Although now we know that at the level of CO2 we have in the atmosphere today, sea levels were 10 meters higher than they are today. So it's likely, that's where we're going to land there. But the tipping point risk is really quite profound. Even at 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, we're already hitting 1.5 degrees. We're in the danger zone for crossing tipping points with the West Antarctic ice sheet, with Greenland, with coral reefs, and even with the Atlantic circulations. So there is a race against time. This is a profound responsibility for future generations. Will they inherit a dangerously destabilized planet or manageably changing planet? And that's the risks we have today. So I'll conclude by that. I mean, we're working on the updates of the great accelerations, bringing them up to 2020 and beyond, and looking to see if there's any more signals that planetary stewardship might be emerging. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this first input with a lot of aspects and a very, very rich and wide perspective. I would like to invite all of our panelists, but of course also our audience, to react. Is there an aspect in all the points that Owen was now bringing up that you would like to comment on or react to? How is our audience feeling? I think, good.
Thank you, Owen. I have a question about the feedback loop of information. And it seems that the question is how to connect those who know with action. But I think that in that there might be a hidden other problem, and that is maybe emerging from what Alex was saying at the beginning, that is the system is more than the sum of its parts, which I think is really the major flaw in thinking systems. There's never something at one level and something else at another level. Everything is at the same level. And the complexity of system thinking in feedbacks about the information fluxes of the technosphere might profit from not thinking only a transfer of knowledge from those who know to those who don't know, which was the project of the last 150 years. I think that we might have to engage with audiences and citizenships in a completely different way. And the reason why we are doing this in the ambit of Ars Electronica is exactly to challenge that notion. Maybe you have something to say about how you are thinking that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the very practical things of this feedback mechanism is, I think there's an assumption that the system is the United Nations, or maybe if it's not the United Nations, it's somehow the World Economic Forum, or these sort of elite fora that where decisions are made that can affect the system. And it's certainly not the World Economic Forum. I mean, there's no sort of decision-making process there, and there's very chaotic sort of emergent behavior. But there's a narrative that it's there, and with the UN, I mean, it's made up of nation states with nation state interests, and the commons, the idea of a global commons is very difficult to compete with that, and there's still this lack of political will to engage with ideas like the commons. It's just not a world. These are about values and worldviews, and at a global level, we don't have that common humanity or a global commons worldview yet on any level.
Maybe I have this. I can use both. Just a spontaneous thought coming from Vienna, the birthplace of psychoanalysis, a geo-psychoanalytical speculation. Knowing is not knowing, you know? It's an abstract knowledge, right? I did not lie on a couch for 7 years, so I've only read about it, but apparently in psychoanalysis there's a symptom, and I was thinking about the terror, you know? The territory knows something, the symptom knows, neither the shrink nor the analyzed knows, right? And it takes a couple of years of a certain technique, it takes a certain setting to make this knowledge. You've got an Oedipus, I mean, you all got, you know, but that doesn't change anything. It takes a couple of years of a certain setting to materialize this knowledge and make it knowledgeable, you know. So is there something like a geo-psychoanalytical development that's necessary to make this abstract knowledge really tangible? And I will address it later as intelligent. You know, intelligent knowledge is, intelligence is something that helps us to act differently.
That's interesting that you. So I'm not going down the psychoanalytic road, but alas, even though I come from Vienna, I just found it interesting because you speak about intelligence here, and the European Commission has coined this notion of environmental intelligence, and then I thought, like, wow. So what imaginary is there about what would we need to know in order to act? And then we leave out huge amounts of knowledge just because we can collect data on something very specific, and that's straightforward and easy. And I do think we have such an impoverished view of the world, why we have this hubris to think that if we just have all these curves and data, then we know something about the planet. And I do think that we need to question that at the first place, and not just, it's not just because you run faster that you get to the goal. We have lost in many ways the goal where we want to go to, and have instead started to collect everything that is not when you count to 3 on the tree, in a way. So I think that's, for me, one of the big problems that we are facing, that we have lost our own sensorium in that sense.
So have we lost it, or are we just, you know, for the first time realizing that we have it and we have that capacity? I mean, because I'm interested in Mark's views on this, but, you know, from a perspective of the biosphere, which has been around for, you know, 4 billion years now, you know, there have been many evolutions of species over time that have had then a massively destructive effect on the planet, like the Great Oxidation Event and the rise of photosynthesizing species. Now they affected the biosphere, they affected the planet, but there was no, they had no awareness of that, obviously. But we are the first species then, as far as we're aware, that has the potential, and we've only had that potential for knowing very, very recently. I mean, over the last few decades, as this impact, in parallel with this huge impact we're having. So I don't think it's any surprise that it's frustrating, and it should make us angry because we should be doing so much better. But it should be no surprise that it's taking time for this to evolve.
I'd just like to add something to that, if I may. I'm a geologist, and I do look at how the Earth system has evolved over billions of years. But I think, as a way of joining Owen and Ulrike's comments, I'd like to say that actually I think we've had knowing for a very long time. There are wonderful examples of indigenous people on this planet who actually create biodiversity. You can think of the Martu people in the Western Australian desert. Their actions create heterogeneity in their environment. They positively encourage biodiversity. You can think of the people who fish salmon around the Pacific Rim. They're very, very good at taking those resources sustainably. I think while we've become extremely good at measuring what's happening to the biosphere around us, we've also detached ourselves from the biosphere itself. If I ask my students as undergraduates to name 4 or 5 plant species in their native habitat in the city of Leicester where I live, they can't get past a couple. And I think 400 or 500 years ago, we would have known every single species in our habitat, and we would have understood how they functioned and how they provided us with sustenance in the same way that we nurture them. So there are the two kinds of knowings there, I think. There's the scientific knowledge, but there's also that real deep understanding, that connection with the biosphere that we have to reconnect with. Otherwise, we're going to carry on making a lot of damage, I think.
Here. Thank you very much. I'm inviting now Armen Avanesian to give us our next input. Armen is here with us, not on the couch, but on the stage. Armen is a professor of media theory. And lately focusing on philosophical and specifically also linguistic and literary theoretical analysis. And he is invested in investigating planetary timescales. So do share what it is that that you observed.
Yeah, I'm starting at 7:20. I thought I have 10 minutes, and I saw 8. All this to say, thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm really very excited. Also to the tech department for having this, because I tend to speak like this, and you couldn't hear me. All this to be polite and not be switched off soon. About this already addressed, actually age-old question of like, does knowledge impact our actions? Or not, you know, there's always been skeptics in the last few thousand years. And given the outstanding scholars and also the empirical work they did of my co-panelists, I deliberately decided not to enter their terrain, but rather suggest some speculative conceptual ideas, hopefully fruitful for our discussion later on. So in the few minutes that I've got here, there's some expansions or conceptual extensions that I want to make. Later on, a temporal one concerning the period we're talking about or taking into account in our discussion. And first of all, really about the Earth as a sensorium. That is, Earth with all its uniqueness, of course, but still, Earth is part of many other planets. And it's really important that it's planets, the plural here, as a very recent astrobiological research tells us. Astrobiology is a pretty new, recent discipline, but extraordinarily relevant when thinking about the Earth and planetarity in general. And one of these very simple, but I think for mankind, very new and explosive knowledges, and it's a planetary knowledge that maybe not everyone had in Leicester or in Vienna a couple of 100 years ago, is that there are not just 7, 8, or 9 planets, but thousands of exoplanets, or billions probably. So there is some new knowledge. Why is this relevant for us today? This topic, this kind of serialization and an understanding of planets and life of them co-evolving, which doesn't mean, of course, to say that life is a common feature of planets, but that it implies life is a regular possibility. To put it in a quick abstract definition, I would say planets are the evolutionary unfolding of a space of possibility for life, for biospheres. Planets allow the constant update of life via various major evolutionary transitions, for example, that always change how life knows and acts, how information is transmitted, and what kind of energy is used and how. No? Not just our atmosphere and humans and their pets, but also technologies and even, as anthropologist Sarah Walker said, mineral diversity has co-evolved with life. This also, I think, helps us understanding better that and how its biosphere has always been acting upon the planet, but of course, without knowing this, including mass extinctions. Now, I want to make this very clear that this is by no means a way of apologizing or minimizing what we are currently doing. You know, it's just to give yet another different time frame. This time, like billions of years, when the Anthropocene or so started. It's simply an observation that life has always acted upon the planet, but thus far without knowledge, a kind of unknowing action, which of course changed with the emergence, and we heard already a lot about it, of concepts like the Anthropocene and a great acceleration. And I hope you start seeing a bit where I'm heading at, the introduction of a planetary or deep time perspective, a deep temporal update and extension, helps us to better understand planets, not just, and that's really important for me, not just the spatial entities, but temporal ones. Planets are temporal entities as well, including the Earth with its specific sensorium and by now intelligent exoskeleton. And this brings me to the concept of updating and the impact of knowledge or understanding of the great acceleration has on this acceleration itself. Now, first, updating. I think it's important to know that according to my little bit of research, the term itself of updating is falling exactly in the period of the great acceleration. So to bring up to date first appears around 1940. Update as a noun is in the 1960s. In German, we use it since the 70s or 80s. So there is a kind of, I think, not accidental coincidence. In this understanding, I think, also update for the German-speaking ones, Aktualisierung. Yeah? Also auf das Datum bringen, to bring it up to date. And in this understanding, the German word Aktualisierung actually already asks for an actualization, making something real, making knowledge real, making the great acceleration an actual part of our acting, which it is not yet, instead of an unconscious effect of our action or catastrophic inaction for that matter. And thirdly, with regards to the concept of acceleration, there is also tiny but very significant, I'm doing the German philosopher now, or the Austrian, I'm sorry, conceptual difference that's often forgotten, but that might be helpful for us in German between Beschleunigung, just more and always more, and Acceleration, which brings something like a difference into a constant temporal repetition, which has a lot to do with exponential developments and so on. So what is the difference and what are the changes of the great acceleration and the visually striking data that comes with it and how we act and how we think? They are part of a new, I think, temporal knowledge regime we're thinking and acting in, and that I suggest to better grasp with two concepts I tried in the past already. One concept is hyper anticipation, and the second is a biographical deep time, the increasing concrete and biographical experience that natural history can be shaped and has an impact on our biographies. So an astrobiologically informed planetary thinking or philosophy is interested in the kind of geopsychological, not psychoanalytical, changes at work within our lives. And it examines, and I think we should do that more and more, the consequences of the increasing intertwining of natural time on the one hand and our biographical time. So this, what I call a new life experience of biographical deep time, includes the current dispositive of hyper-anticipation through an excess of knowledge. We already heard and seen some of it, an excess of knowledge about and from the future. That is a constant bombardment of what's going to happen in 2030, what's happening in 2050. If we don't do this and that, what happens with 10 billion people in 2072, I think. That's when the date is. So let's try to think of it not as a kind of no future, but a kind of, we have too much future to digest, right? We need to grasp and deal with it and include it in our actions. So what we can call a planetary time is a new technobiological form of subjectivation in the Foucauldian sense, for those who know his work. And we can ask ourselves to what extent also the great acceleration and the word update and so on, the great acceleration charts and our knowledge of it has the quality of such a new subjectivation as deep time biological beings, becoming updated by deep time. Because, and here I push a bit the analogy, if we are maybe strictly speaking inhabiting the planet Earth only to the extent that we consider ourselves to be deep time biological beings who have understood the geological and technological foundations of their existence, then maybe we can also become only truly contemporaries of the Anthropocene to the extent that we witness the great acceleration by including it in our thinking and doing. I hear this sound, so I better stop. There's amazing stuff coming here, but grandiose ideas how to save our future.
Okay.
This,
now I want to hear.
I'm happy to discuss. I just really realized when I came here that a couple of years ago, as part of a Berlin biennial, I was invited to do a project, and I founded an intelligence agency. I tried to a transparent, a democratic one, and I think we should think about really founding something like a planetary intelligence agency, right? I mentioned already one aspect of intelligence, what secret services do. They provide knowledge that helps action, to act, and that's not the same as just collecting data, which is an important precondition. It implies like really thinking about agency and also about intelligence, solving problems locally, but also planetary, right? So it's not just a word play or so to come up with something funny, but like an intelligence agency that is planetary and not multinational and not global. If I would have 10 more minutes, I could, so that's the grandiose idea that I had. Thanks for the extra time.
Thank you very much. I believe Ulrike already had a reaction.
Yeah? Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I want to pick you up on this intelligence notion. And so the question is like, what are we collecting? And I remember distinctly when over the past years, a lot of people complained about the fact that people have been taken out of regions that have been physically collecting intelligence, and this has been replaced by technological sensoria, so by collecting data in that sense. So the question is like, where do we bring in this kind of sensing that is a very local and very kind of interactive moment, because it has been, and planetary makes it even more complex, it has been kind of replaced by the only way that we can cover everything is to datafy it to a certain degree and to limit it to that. And I think it's interesting how we use the notion intelligence here, because if it's just about information collection, I want to know what kind of information are we going to collect.
It's not about arcane, that's why like intelligence agency, not secret service or so. So it's not arcane knowledge that helps some individuals hidden somewhere, or scientists or so, It's got to be democratic, it's got to be transparent. So two elements of an I would say updated intelligence definition. One is it's a collective phenomenon, right? The other one is it implies adaptive behavior in real world environments. It's not an abstract knowledge. It's not about just abstract data, but it's collective, and it's about like application and implications in real world environments, and that links it, I think, also to the planetary, which is, we don't have the time to go into details what the planetary could mean or should mean, but it's in a very strong sense a relational term, right? And a relational term not just between different intelligences. And by the way, what we call artificial intelligence teaches us a lot about like other intelligences that we so far did not consider intelligent enough, plants, trees, and so on. But it's, the planetary is also relational in the sense of a relation, understand the relation between geosphere, biosphere, and technosphere as not separated. It doesn't make sense anymore for us. So these are preliminary answers for a better planetary understanding of intelligence, and this by itself is what I call planetary intelligence, and not in the sense of the planet starts sensing and understanding itself, which one can also use this metaphor, make it useful, right? But
We have
I hope that's an answer.
We have a reaction in the audience, I believe. 2, 3. My
It's always a bad
goodness,
sign.
everybody's waking up. Welcome. And the colleagues are on the way with the mic.
Hi. Thanks. Really, really interesting conversation that's happened. My name is Simon Sharkey. I'm a director of an organisation called The Necessary Space. And I'm speaking up really to talk about the role of the artist in the collection of that intelligence and in the interpretation of it and in the embodying of that intelligence and data, and how the artist sits in situations like this. I'm not sure how many of you are artists on stage, but it being an Arts Electronica festival, I think the role of the artist is completely absent from lots of these conversations, because arts is looked at as fluffy. It's looked as a nice to have thing. But I think it's really essential, and it's an appeal, really, to take art and artists and the verbs of art seriously and weave them into this conversation, because when we as artists are able to engage with that data or engage with those narratives and turn it into the intelligence into wisdom and the connection to the biospheres and the systems, we are the ones that make that change possible, because systems and policies are not going to change unless people feel it. And I think what the artists can do in these conversations, not just this, I'm talking about in every conversation about our challenges in the future, we really, really need to take seriously the role of the artist and the role of artistry in the conversations.
Thank you very much for... Alex, you being the scientist, in the role of the scientist in this art-science collaboration, I believe you also had a comment.
Just to... Actually, I'd like to hear what you said. That there was Spanish. Is that okay?
Thanks for the great input. Like I like that we're like using personificated roles now. So like we're establishing the artist. I wanted to introduce the analyst as a follow-up on your statement about thinking as an intelligence agency. I'm Florian. I'm one of the media team here. So switching roles now into an audience. And yeah, I think working with this data, thinking about the Sensorium as an information agency, rang a bell that recently was sounded when the United States attacked the underground Iranian nuclear facility, and thus released that there was one analyst that had been tasked since the 80s, I believe, or 90s, with just this one structure, underground structure, talking to geologists, talking to military planners, talking to aviation experts. But they had like, I'm talking military now, again, arts and dual use. But having a person, an analyst, that's not an AI, that has a very specific focus and is able within a larger organization to get all their sort of partners, I would say, or like has people who they can talk to. I think is also a very interesting follow-up on your thing. But having artists, analysts, like I would wonder where you see yourself in this dimension on the analytical, artistic side. So I think it's a nice sort of follow-up to that as well.
I will still invite, because we're a little bit over time, I believe we had one more comment behind Christoph. Did you want to?
Hi, thanks for all the input on Sunday morning, and also maybe a little bit an annoying question for Owen. And it's inspired by Kim Robinson, Ministry for the Future, the book. I don't know if you're aware of it. And it's also by Panic, yes or no. Do we also need a revolution for institutional reforms or not? Can we do it without it or not?
Quick answer.
A quick answer. Right. Yeah, well, we do need very rapid institutional reforms. I mean, if we are to reduce risk of crossing tipping points, we do need that very, very quickly. I mean, you know, if we value democracy for a bunch of reasons, not even Earth system tipping points, but if we value democracy, we need major reform to ensure democracies represent the majority of people. which many aren't today, and that needs to happen as soon as possible. That will take reform. We need, I would say we need major redistributions of wealth around that to support that, and that as soon as possible. Whether it's a revolution or not, whether it can be done in a more stable way, I imagine it could be done in a more stable way.
Thank you very much. I would like to introduce you to our next input, and he's a traveler in time. Mark Williams is that's a self-description, a traveler in time, or at least a paleontologist. So more specifically, Mark is a professor of earth sciences at the University of Leicester, as he mentioned before, collecting fragments of past life across our globe, and I invite you to share your perspectives with us.
Thank you very much. May I stand?
You may.
So, I'm not very good at sitting and talking. I'm sorry. I have to stand up. So, I'm going to give you a short story told to you by a longfish about the Anthropocene. And I want to begin by thanking Lauren McClenachan at the University of British Columbia for introducing me to this amazingly poignant image, I think. My name is Goliath. When I was alive, I was wise and old, and not a little handsome too. I belong to a group of fishes called the ray-finned fishes. We represent more than half of all the species of animals with backbones on this planet. We are 5 times more diverse than new mammals sitting in this room. I occupy so many different environments on this planet, from high mountain lakes and rivers to the deep oceans. How have I been able to do that? I am part of a noble lineage. I belong to a group of fish that have been evolving on this planet for more than 400 million years. You might know me. You might know me from a fisherman's tale of a giant fish, or of a fisherman swallowed whole by me, or perhaps my fearlessness to scuba divers. But I am no problem for you. My bite is very weak, and I swim very slowly. I have no taste for you humans. I don't know your flesh. Instead, I prefer to eat crabs and shrimps, and sometimes other fish. Can you see my jaws? If you look into my mouth, you'll see several rows of teeth. In fact, I look quite primeval, very ancient. As a species, I've been swimming in the warm waters of the Atlantic for more than 6 million years. I know this, I can show you, because my fossil bones are preserved in rocks in South America. I am more than 20 times older than you as a species in terms of Earth history. And yet, during that entire time, I have done no harm to this world. Instead, I live on reefs, I dig sediment, and I make space for other life, for other animals. Do you see the small boy standing next to me in the check shirt? It's almost as though David is beholding Goliath. I'm more than twice his length. You can see that large fishing rod that he has too. I have nearly been fished to oblivion in the Atlantic. I am now very rare in the coastal waters of the Americas and also in the coastal waters of Africa. In Florida, I was fished as a trophy fish, prized for my flesh and also my great size. Between the 1950s and 1990s, I was fished to near extinction. In the 1990s, you sought to help me. You introduced rules to stop people fishing me. But that's now been rolled back, and I am vulnerable to your impact again. So here I am, hanging by my neck. What crime did I commit? What will become of my flesh and bones, my lips and liver, and even my fins? Humans have devised so many different ways to kill me and my kin. By pole and line, by net and trawl, you take hundreds of thousands of tons of my fish, the grouper, from the oceans every year. And tens of millions of other seafood, tens of millions of tons of other seafood, often unsustainably. Sometimes you even target my children because they will fit on a dinner plate in one of your restaurants. And perhaps even more invidious is that you have damaged mangrove systems everywhere on our planet. These forests are really essential for my children. They live in the upright roots of these trees. It gives them protection. You are leaving no space for me or my family. I see you. My eyes are open. You can see. And I also know that you must eat. But be careful not to eat me, because my flesh contains mercury. And the bigger I am, and the older I am, the more mercury I contain. I am like a mobile sensorium of the Anthropocene seas. As I move through those seas, I am sensing the mercury pollution that you have put there, and I am sensing the overfishing. These are signals of your impact on this world and of the irreversible changes that you have made as a species to the biosphere on this planet. I could be a frog, or a fly, or a flower. I would tell you the same tale of diminishing forests, of threatened wildlife, and extinct species. The boy in the image next to me, he looks quite innocuous. He's small against my apparent might. But of course, the situation is completely different. It is you who is the dominant one. It is me that hangs by my neck by chains. It does not have to be like this. There is enough space for you and me on this planet. So let me be. Just take a few of me, those that you really need, and fish me sustainably. That way, you and I can eat, and all will be well in this wonderful world of ours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very beautiful poetic input, I would say. Is someone on the panel who would like to react? Alex.
Yes, thank you, Mark. I really didn't expect that. That was really, it was very beautiful, very moving. It reminds me of Princess Mononoke, the Studio Ghibli film, which, like, one of the most powerful messages about that film, from my perspective, is this idea that actually there were once animals far grander than us. Every species that you encounter in that film, there's a giant version of it that kind of has a stewardship role in some way. It's a kind of kind of community of stewards. And I raise that because I think it might be a nice contrast to one of the issues that I perceive in the Anthropocene, or maybe it's not an issue, but I think it's a point where misunderstanding arises from, which is that the Anthropocene kind of is simultaneously this moment where we come to reckon with the damage that we've done, at the same time that it reinforces an idea of humans as somehow superior, right? Somehow so big, to kind of put the anthropos at the center. And in a way that responds to a comment that was made earlier by someone who is no longer here, but about art and the need to bring in the artist. And I suppose, you know, I'm speaking as a scientist in this collaboration, but of course I don't think of myself as a scientist. In a way, I think all of us here, or all of us in the world, are artists and not artists at the same time. But the point I'm trying to make is there's something profoundly innovative or there's something about representation that arises from these efforts to continually characterize the current moment in new ways, through the Great Acceleration, through the Anthropocene. You know, the Great Acceleration charts are a series of charts, none of which were produced for the purpose of the Great Acceleration. But when they're brought together, we were talking yesterday about drawing, the charts as a drawing, but in the sense of drawing out meaning in a new way, through association. And similarly, the Anthropocene, to me, strikes me as a representational problem, and one that arises from perhaps a new kind of intelligence that we haven't discussed enough, which is anxiety. I think to some extent, Anthropocene, Great Acceleration are symptoms of a profound anxiety that's all of us are experiencing, but which kind of manifests from scientists in a growing disparity because they see that they know so much, they've provided so much knowledge. From their perspective, they've facilitated a lot of information, and yet no action is taken accordingly. And that is kind of, that leads to a question of, okay, how do we represent the information, not just produce the data, but represent it in a way that provokes the kind of action that is commensurate with the urgency our work demonstrates. So I would be very, in a way, I think that the comment that, but why don't we bring in artists to make us feel, is actually patronizing to artists, because artists and scientists are all involved in affect. It just happens in different ways. Anxiety is an affect. It's up to us as the viewer to perceive it in the work. And to not assume that artists are there to make us feel good. They're there to make us feel bad. Scientists the same. Right?
Thank you very much. We have a comment in the audience. If someone would be kind enough to, thank you. Little bit of morning sports. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing this beautiful story, and I think it was also very haunting story. And my question is maybe like how commenting also on this that there was no nuclear war after like in our times, or on this like the very powerful image of actually like what the first atomic bomb caused in the charts. So my question is like how actually knowing all of this and having this organic intelligence that you mentioned, and seeing the grouper and understanding what in planetary terms, like all our or like human like contribution to planet, like how it looks like, how we can first update our internal sensing, so we know like when we say, oh, there was no nuclear war, actually thinking about over 2,000 tests or extensive like production or like what we do, we feel that actually there is like ongoing like war happening on many layers. So how first we can update our internal sensing, how we can update our language, so we speak differently and feel differently about those things, and how that can affect maybe on updating the planetary policies through organic and silicon or like some more like synthetic sensing. So that's why I'm like curious, like how we can act on these different scales and shift our perception. So maybe in results we have completely different policies, strategies towards the planetary sensing.
That's a lot. Can I maybe start addressing this, and Mark as well? It seems that the shift that you've done, Mark, in presenting science through the point of view of another species, of another animal, it could be interpreted immediately as you crossing the boundary into art, poetry. While I think that we should reject that temptation of thinking that Mark suddenly was acting poetically. This is what science does all the time, and it's exactly the same as what arts do. And the point is that we tend to imagine, out of pure fiction, that there's not been a cognitive shift at the same time as the Great Acceleration. You mentioned the unconscious, and with that you mentioned Freud. I would like to bring to the table Bateson and the cognitive shift of cybernetics, of acting with the world, not on the world, and the conditions that you indicate as well in your question, which is somehow resonating also with Christoph's question about institutions. I think they're really conditions of understanding how to act with the world and onto the world. We have institutions that act on the world. We have technologies that act on the world. We are within. We cannot be acting onto something that we are within. And I think this is where there's a responsibility also for us to do it at Ars Electronica and to state very clearly that there's been a cognitive shift that came from the arts and the sciences and the technologies and the politics that we need to acknowledge. If we don't acknowledge that moment, we are stuck in fiction. As if the 20th century did not happen. We have had this amazing condition. At the beginning it was cybernetics, it turned into complex systems, autopoiesis. Out of that we have Earth system sciences, but we also have Ars Electronica. We are part of the same cognitive shift. And if we don't do this, I think that we will be in deep trouble. And the reason of doing the project within Ars Electronica, it's exactly also to acknowledge that condition, that we all share the same structures. I just wanted to indicate this in order to align ourselves against the temptation of thinking that Marx suddenly crossed a non-existing boundary.
Thank you. Would you be kind enough to pass the microphone immediately to our final input, Ulrike Feld, who is a social scientist that investigates how innovations shape and are shaped by society. She is working in science and technology studies in the Science and Technology Studies department at the University of Vienna, and I'm sure has quite some interesting perspectives to add after what John was just saying.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation, and it's extremely difficult to stick with what I wanted to say after all that has been said. But I still would like to do that because when I read the introduction to this panel, I was thinking about I'm going to Linz. So what is Linz actually as a place? So can I describe it by the coordinates? Can I describe it by population growth, which is interesting, not an exponential growth, but it's declined and it grew again. And okay, then I thought like maybe I could describe it by green spaces because cities like to do that now, but then we don't have data on that. So how can I tell this story about Linz through green spaces? I can't because there is nothing left. And so I loved actually your story very much in a sense because it connects in a very different way to the world around us. It connects to the way what we call planetary, which I don't even know what that means at the end of the day, to be very honest. And so I think that's where I would like to take you in the next couple of minutes. And I would like to do that by using these four notions that are on the slide and to think of them as signposts of our habits of trying to know the planet or think about the planet. So the first is datafication. And so we live today in a world where almost everything is being translated, or at least we believe that everything is being translated into data. Steps we take and transactions we make, temperatures recorded, emotions measured, through likes, all becomes digital traces in that sense. And with this comes a promise that through data we can see the world more clearly and then act on it accordingly. So the great acceleration charts are a magnificent example. They are the children of that promise that data will deliver some form of action. Yet data are not naked. Bruno Latour has this beautiful notion of they are hairy objects. So they are tangled with a lot of assumptions, categories of those who produce them. Nobody was thinking about measuring the green spaces in Linz 100 years ago, so we can't do that so easily now. Every data set carries a worldview, what is counted, and maybe only counts what is counted. No place for the stories. Would you tell that story at the World Economic Forum, for example? That wouldn't be the place to tell these kinds of stories. What is left out, what is considered as relevant or irrelevant. To sense the planet through data is therefore never, in that sense, obviously neutral. It is culturally and politically framed by those who define what is to be seen. And the voices are very selective if you carefully look at which data we collect. Dashboards and graphs do not just inform us, they shape what we're attentive to and where the blind spots are. If we want to understand our present, we need, therefore, I think, broader ways of sensing the planet, give some space to the messy realities, to other stories, to silences, contradictions, and in that form, reconnect science with the world that it pretends to study. Second is what is called trajectorism. This is a notion coined by a cultural social anthropologist, Apadorai, and he says this is our belief that everything has a certain order and direction, and that history can be lined up in one way or another and be mapped, and that progress has also a trajectory. And this is a belief that has been very strong in 20th century and has marked our way where we draw our attention to. Think how easily we line up graphs like the GDP growth or carbon emissions and project their slope forward. Trajectories seem to assure us or frighten us, depending on how we look at it. They promise orientation, some form of control, and the great acceleration charts are, at their core, trajectories that have become a planetary imaginary. But this logic can blind us to the unruly complexities, and I think some of these points have been made already. Framing the future as an endpoint to an orderly line pushes aside the more inconvenient forms, the strategically ignored futures, namely that talk about disruptions, surprises, alternative ways of seeing, etc. To sense the planet differently, we must thus loosen from this trajectorial grip in a way to think that we can have a future that is predictable and clearly seeable, and to also think about colliding and unfinished pathways. That brings me to the strategically ignored futures, the third notion. Innovation societies are adept to directing imagination towards one clearly positively sanctioned future, the future that is deemed worth achieving. And then policy documents, research programs, investment strategies highlight greener technologies, smarter cities, more efficient machines. These futures are curated by us. They are not neutral neither. And in their shadow, if you want so, lie numerous others, muted futures and ignored ones. In a current research project, I have been looking, among other innovation fields, to the digital innovation, with all these devices and promises that come along with it. AI included, that we will know everything much better than we do as humans. They have, at the same time, gigantic electricity needs, they need huge amounts of clean, cooling water, a very scarce resource. They need raw materials that are mined, scaring the environment in many places of the world across the globe. These are futures too, and not just the clean digital futures that we need to think about. Environmental futures, labor futures, infrastructural futures. So to speak, strategically ignored futures is to ask, what are we not seeing when dazzled by the promises of specific innovations? What futures emerge collaterally as a kind of added-on phenomenon without acknowledgement and without accountability? Quite on the contrary, for example, the AI needs of electricity is strongly used in the European context and beyond to push the nuclear, and that ties back to your comment on what does war mean in the connection to the nuclear. If we proliferate and fill the world with wastes that last for 100,000 and more years. Finally, I don't want to speak about time, but I want to speak at the same time about asynchronicities of times. Much has been said about acceleration, that human activity is reshaping the planet faster and more forcefully than ever. But the deeper issue, in my view, is that the world is made of so many conflicting temporalities. Consider climate change. Emissions today may not show their full impact for decades. Political cycles run for 4 to 5 years. Ecosystems transform over centuries. The rhythm of technology, finance, and social life are not aligned, and are not aligned with the rhythms of soils or forests or oceans or whatever you want to use as a sensorium. Immediate gains may generate long-term harms. Urgent action now may show results maybe only much later. And to handle these asynchronicities is actually one of the biggest challenges we have right now. And so by that, I want to draw attention to the coexistence of multiple misaligned timescales. They help us to see why simple acceleration stories will necessarily fail at one point or another, and why meaningful action must grapple with delays and thresholds and feedbacks and other things. So let me come back to what I said about Linz and the difficulty to even describe a place by one story. And in that sense, the great acceleration charts offer one powerful way of sensing Earth, but they are not by far the only way, or even the most important way. To update them today is not merely to extend the axis into the 21st century. It is to ask how such images have shaped our institutions, our publics, our imaginaries, and how they may have narrowed or widened our sense of possible planetary futures. And so maybe addressing the challenges of threatening Earth as a sensorium means cultivating new arts of sensing, grounded in place, yet alerted to planetary entanglements, wary of the seduction of smooth trajectories, yet open to the rough textures of lived worlds, attentive to futures we invite to the table and to those we leave aside, conscious of the many clocks by which our shared world is times. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. And speaking of the ticking clocks, we have come almost to the end of our session, but I will invite one final comment that I believe urgently needs to be made. Thank you.
Are you hearing me? Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna...
Would you be kind enough to stay seated?
No. I'm a performance artist, and it's about walking. About 7 million years ago, we decided to get off our forelimbs into a balance of 2. This I have to show you. And ever since then, we wander around the world looking for reason and transcendence. I can't say this all in English. And what we're doing is, what I'm doing now is unconscious, right? But in this unconsciousness lies der Anfang und das Zentrum jeder Wahrnehmung. Okay? Und unser bildnerisches Kontinuum ist nichts anderes als wie dieser unbewusste Dialog, the unconscious dialogue, with this permanent pull to the center of the planet. And I thank you for the idea, because you said, let's work, was it with the world, not on the world? And so I'm working with gravity, and that's what we all been doing. And I'm trying to tell you and others this for about 20 years, and it's getting me, thank you for that point. I have to say this is very courageous because I'm a stutterer. That's why I decided to be a performance artist. I couldn't speak until I was about 43. And I still have words that I can't say. Okay, it's about gravity. Unser permanentes Auf der Hut sein. This is what I'm doing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I had to say this. Thank you, sir, and thank you all. And the guy that called for the artists, thank you.
Thank you very much for this, I would say, waking up final moment. Thank you very much. And a big thank you, of course, to all of our speakers on the panel for a vibrant discussion. A big thanks also to our very engaged audience for sharing your views, sharing your perspectives, and participating in this conversation. We're now giving you 15 minutes of a break, but we very warmly invite you to stick around because there are numerous artists and scientists and everybody in between in this room who you have a chance to get to know better after our quick break in the Studiotopia collective event World Cafe session that we will be hosting over there. So you have a chance to meet all of our 18 art science collaborative duos who are currently developing a number of very interesting projects together in the context of Studiotopia. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again very much to John and Alex specifically, as well as to all of our speakers. Thanks so much for doing the trip to the somewhat green city of Linz on this final day of Ars Electronica. And thanks, and see you in 15 minutes.
Hello and welcome everybody to what I've heard is the final panel of this conference today here on this conference stage. My name is Eric Bremmer and I have the pleasure of moderating this panel on vulnerability and digitality. It's probably a topic that doesn't come easily together to put being vulnerable in the context of also being digital, but that's precisely what we would like to explore. And I'm really happy and also extremely proud to have such an excellent row of panelists today, and I'll just go through them. We have two performing artists here today, one of who is Noemi Iglesias. She's a Spanish sculpture artist, actually, working with sculptural media and long durational performative formats. Then we have Silke Grabinger, who is still at another site somewhere here at the event. She'll join us a bit later, but she's a performing artist known for her dance interactions, often with technology, such as robots. We have Franziska Nori here with us. I'm particularly happy. She's the director of the Art Forum Frankfurt, and she has a wealth of experience in working with and curating contemporary art. So I'm really looking forward to her expertise. Michaela Quast-Neulinger is a theologian. I'm not sure how many theologians we have at this event, but I'm sure it's not in the hundreds. Michaela is a professor of theology at the University of Innsbruck, and she critically examines signs of our time, especially liberalism, and investigates practices of power. And last but by no means least, we have Chris Frauenberger here with us, who is a professor of human-computer interaction here at the new ITU, the Interdisciplinary Transformation University. I hope I said that correctly. Here in Linz, which has already started, but which is going to have its first master students like this October, I believe. So really great to have all of you here. So the way we are going to do this is we'll have short introductory statements by everybody, and then we'll enter into a discussion. Perhaps I should say who I am. I'm a computer scientist by background who has worked in AI, and also a philosopher, mostly epistemology, but nowadays ethics, because if you're a philosopher and you did AI, that's what you have to do. All right, may I ask Noemi, I think you have a presentation and a few slides. Would you like to present and tell us a little bit about your work, what brings you here, and what your thoughts are on vulnerability and digitality? I think you need one of these.
Are they? Oh, yeah. My name is Noemi Iglesias Barrios. I'm an artist from Spain, and I work with porcelain installations and also long-durational performative formats, as well as digital media sometimes. And the work that I'm presenting here at Ars Electronica is called The Falling City, and it's a project that measures the levels of emotional display in the public space through the recognition of 3 actions, which are kissing, hugging, and holding hands. I have like a small reel presentation. The music is a bit dramatic, maybe, for the content of the video. But yeah, it's just like a promotional video where we can see what kind of actions we are registering from the public space. I started to think about this project when I first got interested in CCTV cameras and the way that they normally are integrated in our public spaces. Because the CCTV camera is a technology that was firstly developed for military reasons, and then somehow, at some moment in our lives, they were introduced in our public space without too much asking, or at least I don't remember anybody asking whether we were okay on being filmed or not. And further, I mean, like not keeping the debate on the desirability of CCTV cameras, I think that it is a technology that uses the technology that develops this kind of system is always focused on the negative side of our behavior in the public space, right? Because it is trained to recognize violent areas or places in the street in poor conditions where the most vulnerable people tend to fall. But there is also a fall in falling in love, and emotions is something fundamental to have in consideration when thinking about the public space. And it is something that we barely think or we barely see anymore, because the architecture of the cities especially is not designed for you to love or be loved. And I thought that we could, not use CCTV cameras per se, but at least open the debate on if there is a technology that has been developed to recognize the negative, why do we not have also a technology that can be developed to recognize the positive? So that's how I started to think about that project. And But this is really the first time that I start working with digital code, writing, and things like that, because normally I work with porcelain, porcelain flowers. I'm a specialist of porcelain flowers, and I do like big murals of handmade porcelain pieces. It goes a lot with my statement, which is based on the romantic consumerism and how we live our emotions through certain social agreements and also products that have been developed for the industries. And this is one of my last exhibitions that I had at the Thyssen-Bornemisza National Museum in Spain, where I could do some like conversations with works from the collection of the Thyssen Museum. The exhibition was called Love Me Fast, and, and it was all about this concept of romantic consumerism. And this is the work that we have here at Ars Electronica. All the objects are unique, and they have been hand-blown with glass, and they have this shape of a flower to don't go too far from my normal or my regular type of aesthetic. And you see that it has different colors. It has the pink, the green, the blue, and the white. So each color is linked to one of the actions recognized by the camera, and the intensity of the light will change when the camera recognizes the action. I'm not using any kind of invasive technology. I'm not using facial recognition, and the way to see the actions is through skeleton recognition. So the camera is trained to see the movement of the body when that kind of action is performed. Oops. So I presented this project in Athens, and it was in a park outdoors. And I like something that I like about this project. It is that somehow it brings or encourages people to love each other a little bit more, at least in the surroundings of the artwork. And I just wanted to talk about another of the projects that I made using digital vulnerability, and it's this project that I made with the application Tinder. I made it in 2018, and it was called Quarantine, but it had nothing to do with the pandemic, I promise. So what I did, I opened a profile that was this one, because it is very important to have a good profile photo. And I arranged and went to 40 dates in 40 days with 40 different users. So it was a way of using like a mass-produced kind of technique into a romantic environment. I had so many matches, you cannot imagine. I had like more than 2,000 open conversations, and because, you know, in my case, I was not really interested in whether I like the person or not, or whether this person might be a potential partner in life or not. I just needed to cover the calendar, you know, like one per day for the next 40 days. So I was following this protocol where you can have, each date could have a total length of 24 hours. And after the 24 hours, I will delete them and next, delete and next. And for each date, I will bring them like a rose, a natural rose. And that was also a way of involving one of these very recognizable symbols of romantic consumerism, which is the rose. And also a way of counting, you know, okay, like number 1, number 2. And at the end, what I did, it was this installation with porcelain, with 40 porcelain masks. And the masks have a very intricate flower work at the part of the vents. And this was the way that I found to materialize the abstract of the performative process into a sculptural methodology. Yeah, these are the details. And they are black and gray and yellow and pink, not because I paint them, but because I was using a very specific technique of firing, and I fire them with charcoal. So the ashes of the charcoal, when they are on a very high temperature, like 1260, they crystallize, and they give all these beautiful patterns of smoky colors. And they're all handmade, petal by petal. And I want to finish my presentation with a sentence from a very well-known writer from Spain that is called Antonio Gala. And it says that love does not need to be understood, it needs to be felt. It is necessity or it is nothing. So it is love or nothing.
Excellent,
Thank you.
Naomi. Thank you very much. Brilliant. That brings us to another category of the absolute. Professor Korst, can I just ask you for your statement? It will eventually.
It will?
Yes, it does.
Ah, perfect. So actually, it turns out we fit together very well, not just that it's about the absolute love and the divine, but one ways of dealing or not dealing with vulnerability is to extinguish any feelings and to extinguish any feeling of love, belonging, and relation. I will make 3 points. So first point, what is vulnerability from my point of view within my research? Second point, what does it have to do with digitality, digitalization? And final point, what is religion in this context, or how can it be helpful, positive, and how is it also abused and highly dangerous? I would say the human being is vulnerable from the toes to our head. That's not my idea, that's Emmanuel Levinas, the famous French philosopher. We are vulnerable beings from the very beginning of our life to the very end, from birth to death, in different ways, in different settings. So we can distinguish between a universal vulnerability that we all experience, this being, we cannot bring ourselves to life. We are given in this world, born by a mother, and at the end we are going to die in some way or the other. And there's a particular way of experiencing these vulnerabilities, this universal vulnerability. If we are sick in Linz, hospitals all around, medical doctors all around, or if we are sick on a lost island, in a hidden island, that's a huge difference. If you're born in a wealthy family, or if you're born into another family that is very needy or not so well established, that makes a huge difference for all the chances you've got in your life. So our idea that we are totally, radically autonomous is an invention of modernity. We have always been relational beings, and our autonomy is always relational. We are born in certain environments, and we need each other in order to live and in order to survive. But the huge question is, how do we deal with these vulnerabilities? How do we deal with our limited existence, with our mortality, the hugest and maybe the last and most absolute vulnerability? In the 1970s, the anthropologist Ernest Becker published a book on the fear of death. There's one thing that distinguishes us human beings from a dog or from any other animal. A dog doesn't know that he's going to die someday. We know that we are going to die one day or the other. And this causes fear, maybe panic, as we read all around. And there are different ways of dealing with this vulnerability, the fear of death. We can create culture and reach some symbolic kinds of immortality. Great music, great buildings, architecture, literature, procreate, have children, all kinds of positive, creative ways of dealing with our mortality. Or we can long for heroism, greatness, imperialism, and in the end cause deep disaster and catastrophe. In the past few weeks, I had the chance to talk to some people that belong to the Silicon Valley, to read a lot about people involved in digitalization. And my question to these developments, and especially to the people involved in these developments, is how do you deal with death? And we have heard that, and I realized, especially in talks with one of them, it's the fear of death and the fear of dementia, the fear of losing control, that is deeply involved in these developments. And maybe you've read the Salzburger Nachrichten. There was a short message that Putin and I think it was Xi Jinping and the North Korean dictator hiddenly talking about how to reach immortality on technical ways. So this book from the 1970s, How to Deal with the Fear of Death and in a positive way or in a deeply disastrous way, is very, very, very actual, up to date. There are two ways of doing it. Extinguish the other, the vulnerable, the weak, those that we consider to be weak. Control everything that could be a danger for your power and for your immortality. Or care for each other, relate to each other, show empathy, love. And this leads me to the final, third point, religion. And we can observe nowadays that religion plays a highly ambivalent role, especially with regard to, some people call it theo-techno-fascism. Religion can support an imperial theology of power and oppression. We can see the alliances of evangelicalism, of Catholic integralism and big tech, finally possibly leading into a kind of, Hille Hacker calls it theo-autocracy that we're observing now in the United States. And what is very, very interesting is that there's also the talk about toxic empathy. Extinguishing any kind of feeling, any kind of relation to the other because it could be dangerous for me. Within the Christian context, we do not even speak about Jesus caring for the other anymore, but about John Wayne Jesus. Jesus does not become a full human being, but a kind of Western hero that extinguishes anybody that is considered an enemy. Strong men that must fight anything that is weak, and particularly the female that is considered to be the most weakest, or the weakest. So in the end, and that's my final point, well, religion, faith can have a positive contribution or very disastrous. The positive can be and should be that it fosters a relational concept of autonomy. Religion, at its best, is relation with the divine and the creation as a whole, a relation between immanence and transcendence. Christ, and I'm a Christian theologian, Christ did not become a killing tiger or Superman or John Wayne, but Christ became a fully human being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm tempted to ask a lot of questions now, but I think we have to proceed and proceed to the digital world, I presume, with Christopher Frauenberger, with a view of human-computer interaction and vulnerability.
Yes, hello. I would like to kind of offer a few different perspectives on vulnerability, maybe from a digital world. One, of course, has to do with the existential idea of vulnerability, just as my colleague now kind of told us and knows much more about as a theologist, of course. That vulnerability is somehow part of being human and distinguishes us from things out there. And that has led to a very modern, and you already kind of hinted to the modernity, a promise of extinguishing vulnerability and promising something like immortal life. And of course, that's a whole kind of culture of transhumanism that we know quite well, and for a long time already, proponents like Ray Kurzweil kind of think about the different ways in which not only digital technologies, but technologies as a whole would allow us to kind of live forever without questioning too much whether we would actually want to do that. Another perspective on vulnerability, of course, can be had through its opposite, namely care. So vulnerability invites human beings to care for that vulnerability. And I want to speak a little bit about a current research project that we're doing where we think about digital technologies in care homes. It's called Caring Robots, and everybody has very strong opinions about this, whether it is at all a good idea of bringing robots into care homes. And a lot of projects indeed have started with thinking about care and what things in care don't work, and then come up with the missing functionality, program that into a robot and put it into a care home, and are quite surprised that nobody really likes that. The way that we approach this in our project is trying to do something different. We start by the questions like, what is good care? And that's surprisingly difficult to answer because it also has to do with working through vulnerabilities. But recognizing a very complex socio-technical and socio-material system of care and the different roles that robotic technologies could play in that kind of has allowed us to look at different roles of digital technology and robots within that broader system of care and think through what are these things, these robots really doing? They're not caring, which seems to be a very intimate and very human affair, but they can certainly be part of an assemblage or of a configuration that would allow good care more likely to happen. I also heard relationality already, which is another one of my key words. Theoretically, we are working through some of the writings of Maria Puig de la Bella Casa. She has written a book on matters of care and reminds us that a lot of that care work is actually relational. We are working with many people in care homes who have dementia, and very interestingly also in dementia care, one of the most prominent theories of person-centered care have to do with relational fostering of personhood, which is to say that a lot of the interventions are geared towards building relationships that people with dementia can use to kind of strengthen their sense of being someone and being themselves. Another thing that Puig de la Casa does, which I think I would like to kind of pick up here also a little bit, for us as a starting point to discuss maybe here on the panel is that matters of care are deeply political. Who we care for and in which way, whose responsibilities we take seriously, whose vulnerabilities we take seriously, is not a given. So I want to kind of remind ourselves that vulnerability is also not distributed equally. And in particular, digital technology does a lot in redistributing vulnerability. It has produced new groups of people, communities, and made them vulnerable, which they were not before. So in many ways, it's about power and a redistribution of power and a very deeply ontological way of configuring people in either way being cared for or being left out vulnerable. And in that sense, I just want to stop here, give us a minute extra time, even. Maybe this is something that we can pick up in our conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christopher. Actually, we were 1 minute short, so we're just, thanks for that extra minute. Professor Nori is going to give us some points from her perspective. I would like to mention, because I forgot this before, that she's going to organize, or there's actually already organized, I presume, an exhibition in Frankfurt, which has the title Anatomy of Vulnerability. Fragility, sorry. It's a pure coincidence. This was actually not the reason to invite her, but I'm glad. So if you are in Frankfurt, make sure you visit that exhibition. Professor Nora, please.
Thank you. So, as you just mentioned, I'm here as an exhibition maker, and I think mainly in images and spaces and along with artists. And the upcoming exhibition carries the title Anatomy of Fragility. And actually, I'm going to give you just some brief insights. And the subtitle is Body Images in Art and Science. The exhibition juxtaposes scientific exhibits and spans various centuries and works by contemporary artists who express a new sense of physicality, is changing perception, and a call for a new idea of humanity. And this is, I think, what we're going to engage in a conversation later. Therefore, fragility has been at the center of a long investigation that my team and I engaged in. After many discussions about what it is that makes us feel so fragile and vulnerable today, is it war? Is it the climate crisis? Is it the autocratic threat? Or just too much of everything? In the end, the most fundamental aspect that we identified being at the core of the feeling of vulnerability is still and as ever our condition as embodied beings. It's our very cellular structure, our liveliness, and susceptibility to illness, harm, aging, aggression, and to death. At the same time, this consciousness of fragility is what makes us experience empathy, love, transcendence, and a sense of relatedness to other beings. It's also a question about who has the power. Vulnerability is political as much as it is about who controls our bodies. And vulnerability is not distributed equally, and I think Judith Butler and Martha Nussbaum have a lot to say, or did already say a lot on this topic. Some individuals and populations are more vulnerable than others. Artists and thinkers seem to agree that vulnerability is not a weakness. It is not a problem that needs a fix, neither a technological fix, like transhumanists, or some of them would argue. But it is our uniqueness against which humans can be so much more powerful than certain technology. This very admission of our fragility is forging a plenitude of artistic doing and philosophical thinking. The questions who and what gains power over our bodies is profoundly political and sometimes an ideological question even, I would say. The technology, though, is a cultural charged structure of power, and it can enable, on one hand, it can enable new perception and experiments, but it has never been neutral. It can embody systems of power, of control, and of dominance. And I would like to bring here some of the readings and inspirational work of thought that my team and I have engaged in during the preparation of the exhibition I mentioned. It's the article, for example, of a colleague that I highly estimate is a philosopher. It's Michael Hauskeller. He's teaching at University Liverpool, and he wrote, among many other enlightening essays, Ephemeroi, Human Vulnerability, Transhumanism, and the Meaning of Life. In this article, Hauskeller argues that human vulnerability is not a weakness, but an existential strength. The transhumanist desire to use technology to transcend the limit of human existence is ultimately insufficient. True meaning in life comes from living consciously within these limits and by embracing and shaping our own mortality. Secondly, I would like to point your attention to Rainer Mühlhoff. He's a philosopher and a mathematician and professor of ethics and critical theory and of artificial intelligence at the University of Osnabrück. His essay on transhumanism, AI, and fascism serves as a very sober wake-up call. Without critical scrutiny, transhumanist ideals and AI hype can merge with authoritarian politics. He therefore discusses vulnerability from the point of view of a democratic system at risk to be subverted by ideologies from the far right wing. Giuliano da Empoli, Swiss-Italian political writer, professor at the Université Sciences Po in Paris, thinks about vulnerability of political systems in the digital age. After The Engineers of Chaos, 2020, in the just published The Hours of Predators, where his focus lies on vulnerability of political systems when they do not recognize and cut up disruptive forces. His book, central thesis, is that political power is undergoing radical change through chaos, through public staging and algorithmic radicalization. The current time predators, this is how he calls them, are the charismatic populists that align with powerful tech oligarchs. They emerge in an alliance with right-wing ideologies that exert influence through policy making and algorithmic data mining of citizens, and together they form a new conquistadors of the digital age. And last, I would quote, and you have to go to the next slide. Can you support my slides? Yes, thank you. Is the Berlin-based visual artist Charlie Stein, who has published what I believe to be a brilliant essay on humans and machines' algorithm of true perception. Stein argues that artificial intelligence is not the other. It is a condensed expression of ourself. Its presence in art and daily life challenges us to rethink humanity, emotion, power, and meaning, and to ask what art can do still in the age of machines. And with these thoughts, I look forward to the conversation with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to add, thanks. Yeah. I have to add, Michael Hauskeller was actually one of the inspirations also for me to organize this panel. So we didn't organize it like this. This is fantastic, brilliant. Welcome, Silke Gravinger, who I took the liberty of introducing you already while you weren't here, and explained that you're just coming from, I guess, the screening of your film still. So it would be great if you could also just briefly introduce your work. Perhaps it's easiest from over here. And I'm not sure if this triggers the thing or...
Thank you. Thank you, Erich,
no worries.
for the invitation. Yes, I think first I would like to show a short video because I'm a performance artist and choreographer, and my work really works through the picture, or a lot of pictures that I create for the work. So this is a little summary of 3 works that I did prior to RUR. That's the performance piece I showed here at the Electronica Festival. And it's a little bit the path line between my artwork and robotics. So please, can you play the video? Thank you. So in this small film, you could see that as an artist, when you are more or less encounter with an entity that is like, in this case, a robotic, a machine, the vulnerability issue is right away in the room. Why? Because you have a lot of situation about safety issues, and this you can actually try to overstep the limit or the barrier as an artist. But for instance, in the first project, the Berlioz project, that was the one with the 3.5-ton KUKA robotic. We cooperated with the creative robotics team Linz and the Ars Electronica and the Bruckner Orchester Linz. So in this case, it was the first time that we had the encounter with this other performer, this entity that you would perform with, that you would give a name right away or a gender. But the truth is there is no identity behind. So what you do is you project all the time. We incorporated the 3.5-ton KUKA robot in the choreography. And the first thing what we did is we kind of reassembled, we copied the movements. And it was very clear through having the human next to the robotic, it actually was more perceived more human or in choreography. For me, choreography is a transfer of meaning. And for me, the robotic is a vessel of meaning. In the second project you saw, when I was a dancer with a blue outfit, there was again a 3.5-ton KUKA robot with 4 small KUKA robots mounted on top of it. And I could have the first time to do a pas de deux with myself. This is actually a very big thing for a dancer, because normally if you have a partner in front of you, then you kind of learn the choreography to the other one, or the presence, or the identity, right? It's always reflecting back to you from the other one. But when you have the machine, we had this skeleton, this abstract skeleton that was kind of like, it was manipulated by the big super KUKA, as we called it. Therefore, we realized that actually it is a possibility to have choreography transferred as an intangible interface onto a body. Why? Because it would be a possibility, like for a musician, to have like a notation, like a partitur, maybe to be reflected on the movement in next generations. So my grandson would have the possibility to dance with my presence. And there we go in the next project with the Boston Dynamics dog Spot. It came in a new challenge. We had the empathy dilemma. There really I started to draw a new method, as I call it, the triangle of horror. The human robotic recipient situation. Why? Because we always project. We anthropomorphize everything what we see, because we have to make a relation that we can keep our own existence in the world. So in this case, it is always like this, that we think there is a demand, or there is also like a dependence from the machine to us. But the truth is, it's the dependence of energy and switching it on and off for now. But the truth is, the recipient needs to have the story. And here there we go. With choreography, you don't have the speech. You have always the possibility of interpretation. So this is my starting point, and I hope for a good conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sue. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you all. I think that should keep us busy for the next 48 minutes and 3 seconds. Let me start with perhaps one aspect that I'd like to start with the artists first, because this is Ars Electronica. So, I mean, as an artist, you're probably more used to making yourself vulnerable than other people, in the sense of publicly being vulnerable. Because whenever, as an artist, you show up, you step out there, you or maybe not, so that's a question already. Is this aspect of vulnerability important? And then when you work with digital media, is it this pseudo or real invulnerability of the digital that creates a tension? I mean, obviously, Noemi, I think in your work, you already said this was driving you to some extent, that there is this vulnerability of showing and demonstrating affection in the public space, whereas the digital technology is not usually used for that. So how important is that? And maybe also from the emotional side, is that something to which you relate emotionally as well?
Well, I guess that as an artist, yeah, you do have to work with emotion. I mean, with your emotions or with some kind of emotions, because otherwise it will become. It wouldn't become a piece of art. I guess it will become something else. But if there is no soul on an art piece, any kind of piece, it can be a digital approach or a painting or anything. But without that, I don't think it will be possible. And I'm not that sure whether that means to be vulnerable, because I don't feel vulnerable when I feel emotional. I feel vulnerable when I'm in a situation where I might be a little bit scared, or I might be I feel a little bit weak, or I feel like I'm not in my statement in a way, but not when I work, or not when I work with emotions, or not when I feel emotions, because that makes me feel alive. It doesn't make me feel vulnerable.
Silke?
Well, I think you have to differentiate between the fact of when you are on stage, you're already vulnerable, also in this moment. But you have to differentiate between the artistic work and the person. So for me, the artistic works as an artist is always existential. So I play especially with the fact of I am being a woman, I'm on stage, I'm putting myself next to a robotic entity that is done by a certain design, by a certain company that already brings a political aspect to it. And in the same time, you play with the different, as I'm not working with speech, but just with pictures and movement, all the possibilities of kind of decoding them from the recipient. So as a choreographer, you just guideline the choreography through, you create the pictures that can be received. And then of course there's a certain responsibility about what the sum up is, but it lays always in the beholder that actually watches and receives them. So this is a huge vulnerability, but we play with it and we embrace it, or I do.
For both of you, the reason I ask this question is because as we have seen, vulnerability is something that maybe has been assessed by philosophers and artists as something necessary. But then I have to ask, who embraces vulnerability? It is not something in our daily life that we really love. So it's something that we are perhaps fearful of. Isn't there an intrinsic fear of being, wounded? Isn't that something that as humans we deny to some extent? I don't know.
I do believe it's also a source. I don't see this is really something so dystopian to be vulnerable.
Right.
I think it's a chance.
Okay.
I think it's a possibility for discourse.
Okay.
It's a possibility to realize, to come back and fall back on your body, and to feel and to embrace, and maybe to actually seduce this feeling also in the recipient or in the other.
Yes, I was thinking that Michaela wants to say something about this.
No, it's really, really interesting when you mentioned you do not feel vulnerable in your work, but alive. And that's very, very interesting because in psychoanalysis, I remember Arno Grün, who researched why would people, ordinary people, move into National Socialism? Why would they engage in really cruel ways of torture? And then he found out there are two things behind. One way is people want to feel again, but they were unable to have feelings because they were not able, due to various experiences throughout the lifetime, to get into relation with one another in a positive way, in a caring way, in a relational way. And the only way to feel something was to torture. And so he thought, or the other way, I do not want to face my vulnerability and deal with it, get it alive, but I must avoid it, whatever cost it is, and thus I must submit to anything I'm called to do. So total submission. That's the two ways. And I think our task is, how can we find the way between these two? Dealing with our vulnerability, but not admiring it. That's the other danger. So seeing in vulnerability just something positive. It's not so positive. It can be a resource for empowerment if we manage to deal with it in a good way, but it can also lead into real disaster when we, for example, what would be a good example for this? For example, when you call, especially in religious or in religions and in spiritual traditions, there is this seduction to say, well, keep small. Keep small. That's the way God wants you to be. Especially in Christian theology, make it like Mary. Keep small, be nice. So it can also be abused for very bad ways. Always be careful.
Let me try and take another angulation, because otherwise we're so unbearably all in a consensus. I believe that we are right now actually facing a situation in time and history where we're being constantly trained not to show vulnerability. In politics, I mean, we've just been witnessing what happened when you show emotions, and emotions make us vulnerable on a public stage when it is mediatized. We've seen what happened when there's a flock of professionals using the emotional nervousness of a partner in the room. And the other thing I think we have all, even the way we sit here, we all try to not show the emotional arousal. So I think there's a lot about our physicality and emotions and feelings. And emotions and feelings have a different relation to our physicality or to our intellectual identity, feeling of who we are and how we relate. So there's an interesting triading that I think always relates back to the fact that we have a body, that the body is inhabited by certain principles that make us arouse, that make us react. The heartbeat changes, the sweat on our hand changes. These physical things relate back to how we then relate to other human beings and to the situation. And I think here again, it's interesting how to interpret it on a political scale, where when we become bodies, part of a collective in the public sphere.
Mm-hmm. I was actually about to ask Chris about this, because I mean, I don't want to talk too much about transhumanism, but obviously, I mean, overcoming or hiding or definitely not showing the weaknesses, our emotions, the brittleness, the fragility of our bodies is like, finds its utmost representation in this idea of first the robotic and later the completely disembodied digital, let's say, consciousness downloaded into a computer and also bringing with it eternal life. Now, Chris, you as a computer scientist, I mean, to some extent, I think don't we have to, and I'm saying we because I'm also a computer scientist, don't we have to embrace this idea? Because, I mean, this is how we are selling the technology. It's something that helps us. It's a technological answer. But then on the other hand, as critical thinkers, it's also a dystopian view. What do you think about it? What do you make of it?
I think one concept that could help us think about that is uncertainty. Back in the Middle Ages, there were particular uncertainty about leaving the house that we don't experience anymore that much. And again, I'm coming back to this point of modernity promising to kind of get rid of uncertainty, and technology in particular being extremely powerful in prediction. Shoshana Zuboff kind of coined that phrase of prediction products in surveillance capitalism as a way of kind of predicting people's behavior, and that becoming a product, the better you can actually do this, right? And in a sense, transhumanism is the same thing, right? It's trying to kind of get rid of the uncertainty of life by promising a prediction of living forever. And in a sense, it's quite telling, right? Maybe in the Middle Ages we weren't so quite sure what happens if we leave the house, but now when we enter a stage, we actually sometimes kind of even are able to kind of extract some life from risk-taking that we seek, right? And nowadays, a lot of people take incredible risks in sports, in other ways, to kind of feel the most alive, because everyday life has almost lost all its risk, right? And then, well, at least that's the That's the common narrative. And then something like COVID happens. And we all of a sudden realize that, oh, hold on, technology didn't give us everything that we needed to kind of survive forever. And there's a lot of uncertainty in our life still, and we get very upset because that was not what we were promised. And I think part of this, that there is like this techno-modern kind of promise of getting rid of uncertainty that I think is part of this vulnerability and risk-taking and coming to life story that could be discussed.
Yeah, I would like to say some things about your approach, because I think, for example, when it comes to predictions, for example, I have one other piece here at the exhibition, and it's a prediction machine, and it predicts your digital sign. Is something based like it's something similar to the horoscope, but based on our behavior as digital users. As long as you say prediction, it will always be an hypothesis. It's just something, it's like a narrative that is based on some objective data, but it's an interpretation of this data made by a human or made by the machine. As long as it is an interpretation, that's it. It's an interpretation, so it will always be subjective. And when this subjection comes, when the decision of the narrative comes from something that it doesn't have the capacity to feel vulnerable or to feel scared or to feel whatever, I don't think that's the path. Because any kind of artificial intelligence or anything that is giving these answers, or it doesn't have this kind of capacity, but it still is creating all these narratives. And then in terms of this long time, you know, how do you say it? Like the
transhumanism.
Yeah, like like digitally you can live forever, no? In a way. Maybe I'm a little bit conservative in this kind of situation, but I'm completely against, because I've recently lost one of my friends, and it's the first time that I lose a friend, like a friend, not something from my family that dies. And then I used to send her, we used to send each other like stupid stories on Instagram, you know, like, look at this, and then when she died, suddenly she was seeing my stories, and then suddenly she was posting something, and then when I was going to share something with somebody, it suggested to send it to this person. And for me that was something very strange to understand, you know, because I think the body has a limit and the life has a limit for a reason. And if we don't have that kind of limitation, it's very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult to understand the life, because as humans, if we don't have limitations, you know, like up and down and left and right, everything is so vast that it's yeah. For me, I'm still trying to understand this digital life forever.
Just as a direct response, I think Elon Musk would disagree with you, but I don't. So I do think that transhumanism is a very misguided idea. And it's not bringing us any closer to what it means to be human, right? I was not defending that idea at all.
I don't think you were defending it or something, but I was just, I just wanted to point at that, because I thought it might be maybe the debate, I mean the explanation or the way I understood it, it was a little bit more into what I was saying, but I was not thinking that you were wrong or right or against or anything.
Let's spend just a few minutes on this claim that some of you made in your statements, that vulnerability is essential for meaningfulness, that it creates meaning, that it creates maybe the social through the necessity of care. We are born as babies, helpless and vulnerable, in need of care. Hence, care emerges intrinsically linked to the fact that we are human and brittle and fragile. Sting said, look how fragile we are. But is this really true? I mean, can we embrace this idea as a society? And do we need to be vulnerable in order to appreciate meaningfulness, a society, and all of that? I don't know who wants to. Yes, I was thinking.
No, may I say the question is a little wrong,
Right.
because it's not about can we decide to be vulnerable, but it's a matter of fact that we are vulnerable. And then we, as I distinguish between universal and particular vulnerabilities, and we cannot decide to be mortal or immortal, to be sick or not, or to break up a relationship. Things just happen. And our challenge, and that's where meaning is created then, is how do we deal with these context situations, our embodied existence? How do we react to it? And that's our challenge, but that's also what makes us deeply human, that we are able to create meaning in relation to creation, to every being all around, but also in relation to these vulnerabilities and the ultimate vulnerability being mortal. That's the huge challenge. And may I add a little bit, because you said that's what we are selling. That's how we are selling trans and post-humanism, or how we are selling technologies, you said. I think that's an important point, because it points to the huge capitalist dimension and the deep philosophies and ideologies that are hidden behind big tech. And that technology is not technology just per se, but technology is also always connected to different ideologies. And our challenge as human beings, if we still want to be human beings, I mean, we can discuss that, is to make this meaning. That makes us human. And that is what is really at stake. The universal human dignity that is deeply connected to vulnerability and the way we deal with vulnerability.
But then let me ask a follow-up question to whoever would like to answer. Is it then even possible to conceive of a, let's say, a digital environment, digital technology, that enables, facilitates, accepts, furthers, embraces vulnerability? Is this even something, isn't there an intrinsic contradiction between these two worlds? And maybe I ask Chris, because I know he has worked a lot with patients also. So how do you feel about this?
I think, not necessarily. I don't think that the life of machines necessarily needs to be human life, right? I think there is a way of distinguishing that. Maybe this is a point that comes back to you, Silke. You said like we anthropomorphize a lot, we project all the time human life onto animate things. let's call a robot that way. And I would agree that we do that, but I also would say that maybe this is not necessarily a must, in a sense that maybe we haven't quite learned how to relate to machines in a way that is not bringing us into this predicament. Also because we haven't had these kind of very agent-like machines around us, we didn't have to kind of learn. It's easier to kind of relate to a hammer as a passive object because it doesn't move, right? But to a robodog, I probably need to learn what it is that I'm relating to. And that goes the same way back, right? I think at the moment, the technological progress is so incredibly fast that a lot of things that we surround ourselves with, we haven't quite gotten the ontological status of them right. So we haven't quite learned what it is that we're interacting with. And for that, a lot of like post-human, which is different from transhuman I'm using here, a lot of post-human work might actually help us to do this because it works through these relations. What are the relations that we forge to machines that then both make us and the machine ontologically, right? So in that sense, I feel maybe there is a nugget there for us to kind of learn how to develop the right sense of what we are relating to.
I think Franziska wants to add to that.
Yeah, my thoughts would tend into the direction, always to break a bit of a harmony moment here, is in the end, I think we have to admit that feeling harmful, to be harmed is an offense on mortal, is an offense to our intellectual identity. Having to admit that no matter how much effort and energy we invest in our thoughts, at the end there's something that nulls us. And it's not by our choice. So, said that, it is a powerful energy from which all the developments that humans have been able to come up with in history, it is also a source that is making us extremely alive. Feeling at a certain moment of an existence, that can happen at whatever moment of our human span of life, the experience of scarcity, the scarcity of health, the scarcity of time, the scarcity of whatever kind, which makes us aware that this is an endly game, I think bears a lot of potential, either to turn into something which is deeply panicking and frightening, or the hope of beauty in the fact that everything is so endly. I don't want to go into the religion thing. I would rather tend into the artistic experience, which might be a philosophical as well, and where beauty is such a counterpower to fear.
I have the feeling that Silke wants to add something, but I'll also give you an additional question, because on the other hand, people will argue, but machines are also vulnerable, and we live in this. And I'm asking you this because I would assume that there is a brittleness of the things with which you interact, that they break down, or that they also have vulnerabilities. But they are perhaps in a different dimension than the human vulnerabilities. Is this perhaps even a misuse of the term?
Exactly. I would more say, thank you, Train.
Yes.
I would say more than it's a dysfunction, or it's the material breaks down, or it's fragile. You know, when the big robot box comes, it's like, caution, fragile, expensive. There's two things. One, I have to answer for Christopher, because thank you for that. That was like on a silver tablet. In my next work, I'm investigating about the fact of who rules to encounter. That means, like, if different persons in a society are actually engaging with a robot, like a humanoid robot or an animalistic robot like Spot, what are the traps about anthropomorphism, or even AI? Because you always expect more of it than it can actually do. And you want it to be more doing than it actually can do. So there's a certain longing for it. And of course, in my work, I provocate that a lot. Like, I'm really like putting this on in the artwork. But what I think what is much more interesting for me is the investigation about different groups of society who will encounter with it, especially also youngsters or children. The next generation, they're gonna have, in a very fast time, very easily more access to those entities. And how do they transfer and relate to it, and how is the engagement with it? And this, I think, needs to have even a performative way of learning those kind of rules, that they're not gonna trap you and manipulate you. Because you should not forget this, these entities they always call home. They always have a certain part of surveillance. They know even a robot that is actually just cleaning your floor, because of the cycle that you program it, you already have a lot of knowledge about your apartment, when you are there, when not, how many animals like cats or dogs you have, and so on and so on. So this is all a possibility of calling home. The other part, I have to say, vulnerability is not being submissive. Vulnerability is a very big chance of actually having a source of an artistic moment. And the barrier or the limit is only defined in the moment when you overstep it. So you can only create a certain field of work or life or emotional attachment or relationship in the moment that you define those limits and borders.
Right.
But I could talk too long about that, so I'm going
No.
to stop now.
You didn't. Michaela, I think, wants to add something.
Yeah. No. I'm not an artist, although this pass says artist. But maybe there's really a relation between doing theology and doing arts when I'm listening to you. Because I'm always wondering, when I'm doing theology and writing my articles and stuff and so on, it's often like dancing on a tightrope. That's what Cardinal Newman, newly created church teacher, says, dancing on a tightrope. And it can, when you're not careful, you need to go into this experience of vulnerability and face it and open yourself to the transcendent or to the beautiful. I would not say that there is a strong gap between the beautiful and the transcendent, but that's actually, at least in the Islamic tradition, the beautiful is also a name of the divine. So it's like really going into this, going into it, facing it, experiencing it, but also experiencing the threat, the danger of this moment. I would call it maybe diving into it and then getting out of it again. In the biblical tradition, there is this strong focus on do not get too close to the divine. You need it, it's life, but if you get too close to it, you will be dead. And I'm wondering maybe if you have sometimes these experiences as well when you go into vulnerability, or when you are in the artistic process, that you're possibly too deep into the process? I just wonder.
You can never be too deep in the process. No. And I think sorry to say, the monster room in the room is fear and guilt. Fear and guilt you're talking about, that's two things as an artist that I have to embrace and that I cannot propaganda. I'm sorry.
Franziska, and then would like to use the last 15 minutes to talk about the future. But
yeah. I would like to come back to a very earthly way to interpret vulnerability, which is definitely the social and the political sphere. Because vulnerable bodies are the bodies that do not have access to the same rights, to the same amount of protection, to the same amount of everything that concerns being a vulnerable body in a sphere, that it is the public sphere, that it is the marginalized sphere, that it is the access to healthcare, that is the access to juridic and to the rights, to same rights, plays an enormous amount that we have not enough discussed today, but which I think plays the central role. I think we are here privileged because we are not in the position, neither of us, nor the context we're in, where these sort of concerns play such a fundamental role. But there's a large part of the world where I think exactly these aspects are crucial. Mm-hmm. And I think talking about the future, let me anticipate a bit of that. I think there will be a lot to defend in the nearer future, especially on the social and the political level, where our roots, our European roots of thinking, of philosophical, ethical concerns will have to inform our taking action in a political sphere now and concretely, and not in a too metaphorical, but in a very concrete way.
Yeah. Thanks for pointing this out. I think you point to the fact that vulnerability is also the flip side of power. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, if you aren't vulnerable, then the powerful is powerless. And so these two things are the elephants in the room, right? If you embrace vulnerability, you potentially embrace to be the victim of something powerful, something more powerful than you. Exactly. So I think in that sense, I believe that's an important aspect. I fully agree. So last 15 minutes, where do we take this into the future? I mean, the idea was to discuss digitality and vulnerability. I'm not sure how much we really focused on this interaction in this session, but I mean, if we accept, and we have all talked about how important vulnerability is, but how do we embrace it in the context of digitality? Does this mean negating digitality? Should we just, is this just denying the technology? Or is there a way of embracing it and using it as something that informs our future? And I don't know, yes, Chris, I was hoping someone would volunteer this hard question.
Melvin Kreutzberg had this kind of famous saying that technology is neither good nor bad, but it's certainly not neutral. And I would also add that it's here to stay. So it's not a question whether we can or should negate or ignore technology. Even in a Promethean sense.
We could be the Amish people and just have minimal, only pocket calculators, but nothing more.
Well, even like Prometheus, kind of in that whole kind of narrative, right now, what it makes us human is also kind of what kind of tools we give ourselves to become who we are. And if we accept that, then one of the questions here is what kind of what kind of tools do we want to give ourselves to become the people that we would like to be? And I think this is pointing to this kind of very political and power debate about what is it that in the future we want to do that then makes us the sort of people we want to be, and where do we debate this? I think we're quite aware that we've lost any democratic arena in which technological innovation or any sort of like progress over digital technology can be actually discussed and fought over in a sense of what kind of technological future we would like to have. I think maybe more concretely, like looking into what can we do to work through vulnerability to kind of arrive at these technological futures that we might want is figuring out, what are these things that we're bringing into the world before we actually do bring them in the world, and then try and configure them in ways that make us different, right? So I keep coming back to this point where technology is also not transcendent in a sense that it's not falling from the sky. We are the makers of these technologies, and we have powers to change that. That's also not equally distributed, but essentially it's a democratic work that we need to engage with to kind of regain some sense of agency over the sort of technology that determines our life. And I think that is the work that will be important in the upcoming years in designing digital technology, not just getting the technology right, but the democratic work of deciding which technology we would want to build.
This is perhaps the point in time for me to advertise digital humanism, because I think I haven't mentioned it yet. So I'm often associated with being one of the proponents of digital humanism, which precisely believes technology is not destiny. We can shape it. And not many people believe this. Many people have now accepted a position where they just give in. But I think we need to change it. And this is what the Digital Humanism Initiative also tries to achieve. Make more people believe that it can be shaped, and there is also a European Digital Humanist Initiative. If you're interested, look it up. But it's not so easy to embrace, on the one hand, these features of like vulnerability, and on the other hand, design technology accordingly. So, any other thoughts about our future? And
absolutely,
Franziska,
I would argue that the whole Ars Electronica has presented so many projects that are going and featuring into the direction of policy making and of regaining back certain amount of say when developing digital systems, meaning from programming to developing or coming from the academic knowledge sphere, outsourcing it into the economical sphere, and which economy do we then accompany with the creation of new software and hardware. And I've seen wonderful contributions here, including the project of Francesca Bria, for example, that is reaching a launch for regaining back power and avoiding vulnerability through handing over the tools of our contemporary and future come and live together, distributing it on many more shoulders than just on a few mega companies.
Very quick response to that. I think that's amazing, but I also want to caution that, you know, we've seen this for a long time, like in the open source movement, with participatory design in Scandinavia in the 70s, for example. All these examples have been around for a long time, and the trajectory has not changed. We're seeing ever more power being centralized in fewer hands. So my question is, like, if we already know that in Ars Electronica all these really nice, amazing things happen, why doesn't it change the world?
Because there's policy making involved in this and new norms that we need to embrace if we really want to make that sort of vision with impact, turn it into an impact.
Michael, also the question for you, I mean, how does this inform our vision of the future?
I must admit, for the past few months, I've been very desperate about our future, exactly for the reasons you mentioned, that power is very concentrated. Everything we've been talking about is about power, the spreading of power, and how can we change it, especially for, maybe not for our future, but for the possible future of our children. And I think what we really, really need is this value-based engineering, as Sarah Spiekermann calls it. Technology is not just there. It is made by people for certain reasons with certain ideologies in the back. And that's what we need to change. Currently, we've got an anthropology there that says, worthy are the wealthy. We're doing technology for some people that consider themselves to be worthy to be rescued because they are the geniuses of this world. And they deserve to be immortal forever. Immortal forever, yeah. And that really has to be changed. I have no idea how this will work in practice. One contribution could be to network, really to network among the disciplines, among the people, to work together and to really rethink and refocus on this idea that we are all human beings, no matter how much money, no matter what color, no race, gender, whatever, but we are human beings that just simply want to live together in this world.
Let me just perhaps add, and also maybe underlining why I think it's important to have a theologian here is because this idea of the invulnerabilities through digitality, of course, implicitly also provide an idea, as you said, an anthropological optimum or the perfect human that is invulnerable and not the imperfect human that perhaps, and I think theology has or religion for that matter, has a long-standing tradition in pointing out that the imperfect human is indeed valuable and perfect.
Yeah,
and I think there is a
that's the
contradiction.
criterion, really. It's
Yes.
not about being perfect. It's about being transformed.
Exactly.
That's it. Nobody is perfect,
Right.
and everyone is nobody. And we shouldn't even be perfect. Nobody of us should be perfect. But our life is a way of transforming, of making meaning in relation to each other. That's the very basic idea of religion, relating to each other and to the transcendent, however you might call it. As a Christian, I call it God, who incarnated himself in Christ. But that's me as a Christian, and there can be different ideas of relating to the divine and to each other. And the huge challenge is also, and the contribution of religions maybe could be to work together for this idea of sincere human dignity, an idea we lost. We are looking for empathy in machines, and we are looking for signs of life in machines and on Mars. And I'm wondering, why don't we care about the life the concrete life that is all among us, but looking for living machines sometimes, yeah.
Thank you. Noemi, how would you like your work to inform the future? Will you be more on Tinder?
I think Tinder is already a little bit vintage, and it's not, it's not in fashion anymore somehow. I don't know exactly why, but it's being, like some of the studies, they see that it had like a very high rise at the beginning, and then during the pandemic it was like the peak point, but then in the latest 3 years or even 4 years is somehow not in use anymore, and it has become like something that people that might actually be looking for a partner or a potential emotional support is not really using that platform. And I'm not against dating apps or I'm not against or with dating apps. I think they are tools, and if you are aware of what is happening with your privacy in these kind of situations, then all good. You can use whatever you want if you feel like you need to put yourself into that kind of situation. But it is certainly a very vulnerable moment for the users to be there. I think that not all of them feel the same way, and some of them might just don't care and use the catalog as if they were using a magazine or any other kind of catalog with different products. But the levels of vulnerability of the users is normally quite high.
Your work reminded me that there are these T-shirts you can buy where it says, "There should be more kissing." And I think that's probably an answer. Silke, I also have to ask you, so your take on the future, do you want better robots to dance with?
No.
I thought so.
Why? we are living in a capitalistic system where we're creating humanoid robots that actually no one really needs, because why do we need this? It's, I think, as Oliver Schürer would say, who sits in the second row, we only need actually robots with long legs till the hip, and they can also transport everything. But of course, we want to design something that looks like us, right? That we can make a relation. And for me, as in my artistic practice, I define myself as a woman. Right now, I am doing my work, and for me, it's important to reflect what's going on right now. It's a social political statement, and I take these capitalistic products that are there, and for me, it's a possibility to reflect them, to challenge them, and to have a moment of discourse. We are just buying it because, you have to have a date with your humanoid robot as a point company manager, right? It's not the watch anymore, it's the robot that you have to go out with. Right. So I think there's a lot of very interesting streams are going on in this. As Franziska said, we are really privileged. We're really privileged what we're doing. We have access to all those machines. I can do a cooperation, what is fantastic as an artist that I can have this material. But for me, it is the real challenge to actually challenge those materials and those myths and legends, they are built around it. For me, it's like die neuen Mythen des Alltags by Roland Barthes. It's a vessel that we tease, that we can have something that, maybe it can give us an answer on something. For me as an artist, I don't wanna give an answer. I don't need to school society. That's not my proposition. My proposition is to challenge it.
Thank you very much, and I think that brings us to the end of this panel. Indeed, when planning it, I already thought this was a challenging topic. So that brings us back to this challenge, vulnerability, and how to, if ever, level it with digitality. I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank Silke Grabinger, Noemi Iglesias, Michaela Quast-Neulinger, Franziska Nori, and Chris Frauenberger. Thank you for your time on this Sunday afternoon, the last and final session of this conference. It was a big pleasure. Thank you very much. Cheers.